Every single morning, Ethan Moore made the same choice: help a stranger in a wheelchair. He thought it was just kindness. But on one rain-soaked Friday, she looked him in the eye and said 5 words that shattered everything. "I know who you are." 3 years ago, Ethan lost his wife in a tragedy that nearly destroyed him. Now, without realizing it, he'd been helping the one person connected to that devastating night. This is the story of how the smallest acts of compassion can ripple through broken lives and create something powerful enough to heal wounds we didn't know we carried. Stay with me until the very end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The alarm went off at 6:15 a.m., the same as it had every morning for the past 3 years. Ethan Moore's hand shot out from under the covers, silencing the piercing beat before it could fully infiltrate his consciousness. For a moment, he lay there in the gray dawn light filtering through the bedroom curtains, staring at the ceiling, letting the familiar weight of another day settle onto his chest. The bed felt too big. It always did. He turned his head slightly, just enough to see the other pillow, pristine, untouched, arranged exactly as it had been when he'd made the bed yesterday morning, and the morning before that, and every morning since the world had tilted off its axis and refused to right itself. "Dad?" The small voice came from the doorway, and Ethan sat up immediately, shaking off the heaviness that threatened to pull him back down into the mattress. "Hey, Soph." He managed a smile, the same one he'd practiced in the bathroom mirror until it looked almost real. "You're up early." Sophie Moore stood in the doorway in her pajamas, the ones with the little cartoon cats that were getting too small for her 9-year-old frame. Her dark hair was a mess of tangles, and she clutched her stuffed rabbit against her chest, the way she'd done since she was 3. "I couldn't sleep," she said quietly. Ethan knew why. It was Thursday. Well, technically Friday now, but Thursday nights were always hard. Thursday had been pizza night. Thursday had been when Mom came home early from the hospital, and they'd all pile onto the couch and watch cooking shows, even though none of them could cook worth a damn. Thursday had been their night. "Come here," Ethan said, patting the bed beside him. Sophie crossed the room quickly, her bare feet silent on the hardwood floor, and climbed up next to him. She fit perfectly under his arm, her head resting against his chest, where she could probably hear his heartbeat, steady, constant, still working even when it felt like it shouldn't be. "We're okay," Ethan whispered into her hair. "We're going to be okay." It was the same thing he'd said every Thursday night for 3 years. He wasn't sure either of them believed it anymore, but the ritual mattered. The routine mattered. Structure was the scaffolding holding them both upright. "I know," Sophie whispered back. They sat like that for exactly 7 minutes. Ethan had learned to count the time, to portion out comfort in measured doses before the day demanded they get moving. Then he kissed the top of her head and gently disentangled himself. "Pancakes or oatmeal?" he asked, standing and reaching for the jeans he'd draped over the chair the night before. "Can we have both?" "Ambitious. I like it." Ethan pulled on his shirt, a faded blue Henley that had seen better days. "Go get dressed. We leave at 7:30 sharp." Sophie nodded and slipped off the bed, pausing at the doorway. "Dad?" "Yeah, sweetheart?" "Do you think she'd be proud of us?" The question landed like a punch to the solar plexus, unexpected and devastating. Ethan's hand stilled on his belt buckle. He looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw so much of Claire in those dark eyes, in the way she tilted her head when she asked hard questions, in her stubborn refusal to pretend everything was fine when it wasn't. "I think," Ethan said slowly, "she'd be so proud of you she wouldn't be able to stand it. And I think she'd probably tell me I need a haircut and better shirts." Sophie's laugh was small but genuine, and Ethan counted it as a victory. 35 minutes later, they were ready. Ethan had managed both pancakes and oatmeal, though the pancakes were slightly burned and the oatmeal was too thick. Sophie ate without complaint, picking at the edible parts and rearranging the rest. She'd learned not to hurt his feelings about his cooking, which made Ethan feel both grateful and guilty in equal measure. He packed her lunch: turkey sandwich, apple slices, the granola bars she actually liked, not the ones he kept accidentally buying, and double-checked her backpack for the permission slip he'd signed 3 days ago. Sophie watched him with patient amusement. "You already checked it, Dad. Twice. 3rd time's the charm." But he zipped the backpack and handed it to her. "Ready?" "Ready." They stepped out into the crisp October morning at exactly 7:32 a.m., 2 minutes behind schedule, but within acceptable parameters. The street was quiet, lined with maple trees that had turned brilliant shades of orange and gold. Leaves scattered across the sidewalk, crunching under their feet as they began the familiar 8-block walk to Sophie's school. This was Ethan's favorite part of the day. Just the two of them, the world still waking up, no demands except putting one foot in front of the other. They'd developed a rhythm over the years. Sophie would tell him about whatever book she was reading, or complain about the boy in her class who kept stealing her erasers, or ask questions about things she'd heard at school that she didn't quite understand. Today, she was quiet. "Penny for your thoughts," Ethan said as they waited at the first crosswalk. Sophie shrugged, adjusting the straps on her backpack. "Just thinking." "About?" "Mrs. Patterson said we're supposed to bring in photos for Family Tree Day, like old photos of our grandparents and stuff." Ethan's chest tightened. "Okay, we can do that. Grandma and Grandpa Moore have tons of old albums. We'll call them this weekend." "What about Mom's parents?" The light changed. Ethan took Sophie's hand and they crossed the street, his mind racing for the right words. Claire's parents had moved to Florida 2 years after the funeral. They called on birthdays and holidays, but the distance, both geographical and emotional, had grown insurmountable. Grief had scattered the family like dandelion seeds in the wind. "We'll figure it out," Ethan said. "Maybe they have some digital photos they can send." Sophie nodded, but Ethan could tell she was filing this away in the growing list of things that used to be simple and weren't anymore. They turned onto Maple Street, the route so familiar Ethan could walk it in his sleep, past the coffee shop that wasn't open yet, past the bookstore with the dusty window display, past the small park where homeless guys sometimes slept on the benches. Then, 3 blocks from the school, past the corner pharmacy with the American flag hanging limply from the pole out front. That's where Ethan saw her. She was in a wheelchair, manual, not electric, positioned awkwardly at the corner where the sidewalk met the pharmacy's entrance. The curb cut was there, but her chair was angled wrong. One wheel caught on the lip of the concrete. She was struggling, trying to push herself forward, but the angle was all wrong and she was just spinning in place. Ethan slowed his pace, watching. She looked to be in her early 30s, dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, wearing a jacket too light for the weather. There was a canvas bag hanging from one of the wheelchair handles, bulging with what looked like groceries or pharmacy supplies. No one else was around. The morning was too early for foot traffic, and the pharmacy wouldn't open for another 20 minutes. "Dad?" Sophie had noticed too. She was looking up at him with that expression she got, the one that said she was waiting to see what he'd do, measuring him against some internal standard only she understood. Ethan didn't hesitate. He couldn't. It wasn't in him to walk past someone who needed help, even if it meant being 2 minutes late, even if it meant disrupting the routine. "Come on," he said to Sophie, and they crossed the street. The woman looked up as they approached, and Ethan saw frustration flash across her face, followed quickly by embarrassment. She stopped struggling with the chair and sat back, her hands falling to her lap. "Morning," Ethan said, keeping his voice casual, non-threatening. "Looks like you're having some trouble there. Mind if I help?" For a moment, he thought she might refuse. Her jaw tightened and her eyes, a striking gray-green, swept over him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Suspicion? Resentment? Fatigue? Then she sighed. "The wheel's caught. I can't get the angle right." "No problem." Ethan moved behind the chair, assessing the situation. "I'm just going to lift the front a bit and shift you back. That okay?" "Yeah, fine." He gripped the handles firmly, tilted the chair back just enough to free the caught wheel, and guided it smoothly onto the proper curb cut. Then he lowered it gently and stepped back. "There you go." The woman rotated the wheels once, testing, and the chair moved freely. She looked back at him over her shoulder, and this time her expression had softened just slightly. "Thank you." "No trouble at all?" Ethan glanced at the pharmacy. "You need anything else? We've got a couple minutes." "No, I'm good. Thank you," she said again, and there was something final in her tone. Conversation over. "All right then, you have a good day." He rejoined Sophie on the sidewalk, and they continued walking. Sophie was quiet for half a block before she spoke. That was nice of you, Dad. It's nothing, just being a decent human. Mom would have done the same thing. Ethan's throat went tight. Yeah, she would have. They made it to school with 3 minutes to spare. Ethan walked Sophie right to the entrance like he did every morning, ignoring the other parents who dropped their kids at the curb and drove off. Sophie was too old for this, she'd told him multiple times, but Ethan couldn't bring himself to stop. These 3 minutes at the school gate felt sacred. Have a great day, sweetheart. He bent down and she let him kiss her forehead, even though her friends were watching. You too, Dad. Don't forget we need poster board for the science project. Poster board, got it. He had no idea what science project she was talking about, but he'd figure it out later. Love you. Love you too. And then she was gone, disappearing into the stream of children flowing through the double doors, and Ethan was left standing on the sidewalk feeling the same hollow ache he felt every morning when she left his sight. He shoved his hands in his pockets and began the walk back home. The morning stretched ahead of him, empty, structureless, nothing to do until it was time to pick Sophie up at 3:15. Ethan worked from home as a freelance graphic designer, which sounded flexible and modern, but mostly meant he spent hours staring at his computer screen, taking jobs he didn't care about to pay bills that never stopped coming. He'd had bigger dreams once. He and Claire both had. But dreams required energy, and grief was exhausting. As he passed the pharmacy again, Ethan noticed the woman was gone. The corner was empty except for a few scattered leaves blowing in the light breeze. He thought briefly about her, wondered what her story was, whether she lived nearby, what had happened to put her in that chair. Then he let the thoughts drift away. It was a random encounter, a tiny moment of connection in a disconnected world. He'd never see her again, except he did. The next morning, at exactly 7:41 a.m., she was there again. Same corner, same wheelchair, same canvas bag. This time she wasn't stuck on the curb, but she was struggling to open the pharmacy door while managing her chair, and when Ethan and Sophie approached, she looked up with an expression that might have been recognition or might have been resignation. Morning, Ethan said. Morning. She shifted the bag in her lap. I can manage. I'm sure you can, but I'm here, so... He stepped forward and pulled the door open, holding it while she maneuvered her chair through. It took some careful navigation, but she made it, and when she was inside, she glanced back at him. Thank you. Any time. He let the door swing shut and continued walking Sophie to school. Neither of them mentioned it, but Ethan felt Sophie's small hand slip into his as they crossed the next street, and he squeezed it gently. The third morning, the woman was there again. The fourth morning, she was there again. By the end of the first week, it had become part of the routine. Ethan and Sophie would leave the house at 7:32, walk 8 blocks, and at block 5 they would encounter the woman in the wheelchair. Sometimes she needed help with the curb. Sometimes she needed help with the door. Sometimes she just needed someone to steady her chair while she adjusted her bag or fixed a loose strap. They never exchanged names. Ethan didn't ask, and she didn't offer. The interactions were brief, practical, wordless, except for the necessary minimum. Thank you. No problem. Have a good day. But Ethan started to notice things. He noticed that she came to the pharmacy every morning, not just some mornings. He noticed that the canvas bag always contained the same items, a few groceries, sometimes a prescription bottle, once a small potted plant. He noticed that she never made eye contact for more than a second or two, as if prolonged connection might shatter something fragile. He noticed that on rainy days she struggled more. On windy days she wore gloves with worn-out fingertips from gripping the wheels. On the coldest mornings she shivered in that too-thin jacket, but never asked for help with anything other than the immediate physical obstacle in front of her. And he noticed that Sophie was watching, always watching, learning something from these encounters that Ethan couldn't quite name. 3 weeks in, on a Tuesday morning with frost on the windows and breath visible in the air, the woman's wheelchair had a flat tire. She was sitting at the corner, staring down at it with an expression of pure defeat. Ethan didn't even slow down. He just walked over, crouched down beside the chair, and examined the wheel. You got a pump? He asked. She shook her head. No, I didn't realize it was flat until I got here. Okay, no problem. There's a gas station 2 blocks over. They'll have air. He stood up and looked at Sophie. Soph, you okay being 5 minutes late today? Sophie nodded immediately. Yeah, Dad. Ethan moved behind the wheelchair. I'm going to push you to the gas station. Is that all right? The woman's hands tightened on the armrests, and for a moment Ethan thought she might refuse. Accepting help with a door was one thing. Accepting this level of assistance, being pushed, being dependent, surrendering control, that was something else entirely. You don't have to, she said quietly. I know, but it's cold and your tire's flat and the gas station's right there. So unless you've got a better plan, I'm going to help. A long pause. Then, okay. Ethan pushed her chair down the sidewalk, Sophie walking beside them. The woman sat rigidly, her posture screaming discomfort, but she didn't protest. At the gas station, Ethan filled the tire while the attendant, a kid who couldn't have been more than 19, watched with vague disinterest. When the tire was full and holding air, Ethan tested it, rolling the chair forward and back. That should get you through the day, he said. But you might want to get it checked. Could be a slow leak. I will. Thank you. The woman's voice was tight, controlled. I really appreciate it. No problem. Ethan stepped back, ready to leave, but something made him pause. Look, I know accepting help isn't easy, but if you ever need anything, I'm fine, she cut him off. Not rudely, but firmly. I can manage, but thank you for this. Really. Ethan nodded. Okay, well, have a good day. He took Sophie's hand and they headed toward the school, now officially 7 minutes late. Sophie was quiet again, but as they reached the school gates, she looked up at him with an expression far too old for her 9 years. She's sad, Sophie said. Yeah, Ethan agreed. I think she is. Are you going to keep helping her? I don't know, Soph. If she needs help, yeah, but I can't force it on her. Sophie considered this. Mom used to say that sometimes people need help but don't know how to ask for it. Ethan's heart cracked a little. Your mom was a smart lady. I know. Sophie hugged him quickly, then pulled away. I gotta go. Love you. Love you too, sweetheart. He watched her run into the school, and then he stood there on the sidewalk for a long moment, thinking about Claire, about the way she'd moved through the world with this innate understanding of people, this ability to see past the walls they built and straight into the hurt underneath. She would have known what to do with the woman in the wheelchair. She would have known exactly how to help without making it feel like pity, how to offer support without demanding gratitude. Ethan was just stumbling through, doing his best, hoping he wasn't making things worse. The next morning, Wednesday, he and Sophie saw the woman at the usual corner. She had made it onto the sidewalk without help, but she was struggling with a bag that had split open, groceries spilling onto the ground around her chair. Ethan didn't ask. He just knelt down and started gathering items. Sophie helped, collecting oranges that had rolled under the chair. Together they repacked everything into the woman's backup bag, working in practiced silence. When they finished, the woman looked at Ethan with something new in her expression. Not gratitude exactly, more like recognition, as if she was finally seeing him as a person rather than just another stranger in a world full of strangers. You don't have to do this every day, she said. I know. I mean it. I'm not your responsibility. I know that too. She studied him for a moment longer, then shook her head. You're a strange man. I get that a lot. Ethan stood up, brushing dirt off his knees. We've got to get going. You need anything else? No, I'm good. As he and Sophie walked away, Ethan heard her voice behind them, quieter than before. Thank you. He raised a hand in acknowledgement, but didn't turn around. The pattern continued. Day after day, week after week, the woman was there. Most mornings, the help she needed was minimal. A door held, a bag steadied, a wheel unstuck from a crack in the pavement. But the ritual had become ingrained in Ethan's routine now, as essential as the morning coffee or the goodnight kiss he gave Sophie before bed. October bled into November. The trees lost their leaves, the mornings grew darker and colder, and the first frost gave way to the first snow. Through it all, the woman appeared at the corner, and Ethan helped her, and they maintained their careful distance. He learned things about her without her saying a word. He learned that she preferred to struggle for a few minutes before accepting help, as if giving herself time to exhaust all other options first. He learned that she had a small scar above her left eyebrow that became more visible when she was frustrated. He learned that she smiled, just barely, just the tiniest upturn at the corner of her mouth, when Sophie said good morning. He learned that whatever had put her in that wheelchair, it hadn't been that long ago. Her arms were strong, her movements practiced but not instinctive. This was still new territory for her, and she was navigating it alone. Ethan wanted to ask, wanted to know her name, her story, why she came to this pharmacy every single morning, why she never had anyone with her. But he knew better. Some people wore their privacy like armor, and pushing too hard would only drive them further away. So he helped when she needed it, stayed quiet when she didn't, and tried not to think too hard about why this routine had become so important to him. One morning in late November, Sophie asked the question Ethan had been avoiding. "Dad, do you think she's lonely?" They were 3 blocks past the pharmacy, the woman already behind them for the day. Sophie's breath formed little clouds in the cold air as she looked up at him. "I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe. She doesn't have anyone with her, ever. Some people like being alone." "Do you?" The question caught Ethan off guard. He slowed his pace, thinking. "Sometimes, but I've got you, so I'm never really alone. What about when I'm at school, or when I'm at Grandma's? Then, yeah, I guess I'm alone, but that's different." "How?" How indeed. Ethan struggled to find words that wouldn't sound hollow. "I guess I'm alone, but not lonely. There's a difference." Sophie thought about this. "Do you think she's both?" "I think," Ethan said carefully, "that she's dealing with something really hard. And sometimes when things are hard, people pull away because it feels safer than letting anyone see them struggle." "Is that what you did? After Mom died?" Christ, when had his daughter become so perceptive? Ethan stopped walking and knelt down so they were eye level. "Yeah," he admitted. "Yeah, I did that for a while. But then I realized I had you, and you needed me, and I couldn't afford to pull away. So I didn't." "But you still miss her?" "Every day." Sophie hugged him, her small arms fierce around his neck. "I miss her too." "I know, baby, I know." They stayed like that for a moment, 2 people holding on to each other in the middle of a cold November sidewalk, bound together by loss and love and the daily choice to keep moving forward. When they pulled apart, Sophie's eyes were wet, but she was smiling. "We should learn her name. The lady in the wheelchair. It seems rude not to know. Maybe she doesn't want us to know. Or maybe she does, but doesn't know how to tell us." Ethan stood up, taking Sophie's hand again. "Tell you what, if the opportunity comes up naturally, we'll introduce ourselves. But we're not going to force it. Deal?" "Deal." But the opportunity didn't come. Not that week, not the next. December arrived with heavy snow and shortened days, and still the woman appeared at her corner every morning, and still they helped her, and still they remained strangers bound by routine. Ethan stopped trying to make sense of it. Some things didn't need explanations. Some connections existed outside the normal rules of social interaction. This was just what they did now. A small act of service in a world that felt increasingly short on kindness. Christmas approached. Ethan and Sophie put up a tree, smaller than the ones they'd had before, but still decorated with all the ornaments Claire had collected over the years. They baked cookies that came out slightly burned. They watched holiday movies and drank hot chocolate and tried to make new traditions while honoring the old ones. On Christmas Eve, Ethan tucked Sophie into bed and sat with her in the dark, listening to her breathing even out as she fell asleep. Then he went downstairs and sat in front of the tree, alone, staring at the lights and thinking about all the Christmases that had come before. The grief never went away. That was the hardest lesson he'd learned. It didn't diminish or transform into something more manageable. It just became part of the landscape of his life, a constant weight he'd learned to carry. But helping that woman every morning, that had become something else. A small light in the routine. A reminder that he was still capable of showing up for someone, even in the smallest ways. It didn't fix anything, didn't heal the fundamental wound of loss, but But it mattered. It had to matter. The day after Christmas, on a cold Thursday morning with fresh snow on the ground, Ethan and Sophie made their usual walk to school. The woman was at her corner, but today something was different. She was crying. Not loudly, not dramatically, just silent tears running down her face as she sat in her chair, staring at nothing, her bag forgotten in her lap. Ethan froze. Sophie's hand tightened in his. This was different territory. This required more than helping with a wheel or opening a door. This required actual human connection, and Ethan had no idea if the woman wanted that from him. But he couldn't just walk past her. Not like this. "Soph," he said quietly, "wait here for a second, okay?" Sophie nodded, her eyes wide. Ethan approached slowly, giving the woman time to notice him and compose herself if she wanted to. But she didn't look up, just kept crying, her shoulders shaking with the effort of keeping it silent. "Hey," Ethan said softly. "Bad morning?" She flinched, finally looking up at him. Her eyes were red, devastated. For a moment he thought she'd tell him to leave, to mind his own business, to stop pretending this meant anything. Instead, she said, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Today's hard." "That's okay. You don't have to apologize." Ethan glanced around looking for a bench or somewhere they could sit, but there was nothing, just the cold corner and the early morning silence. "Can I do anything?" She shook her head. No, I need a minute." "Take all the time you need." He stood there, not leaving, not pushing, just present. Sophie stayed on the sidewalk watching. The minutes stretched out, marked only by the sound of the woman's breathing as she struggled to regain control. Finally, she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and looked up at him again. "My brother," she said, her voice hoarse. "Today's his birthday. He would have been 29. Would have been. Past tense. Loss." Ethan's chest constricted. "I'm sorry." "He died 3 years ago. He was a paramedic, responded to a car accident and—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "And he just didn't come home. 3 years ago. The same year Claire died. The same year Ethan's entire world had shattered. They were survivors of the same timeline, walking parallel paths through grief. "I lost my wife 3 years ago," Ethan said quietly. "Different circumstances, but yeah, I get it. The anniversaries are brutal." The woman looked at him with new recognition, seeing past the surface for the first time. "I didn't know." "No reason you would." Ethan gestured to Sophie. "That's my daughter, Sophie. She's 9. She was 6 when it happened." "God." The woman's expression crumpled again. "I'm so sorry." "Me too, for you, for your brother." They stood in shared silence, two strangers united by the specific kind of pain that only loss can create. Then the woman straightened in her chair, wiping the last of the tears away. "I should go. The pharmacy opens soon." "Okay." Ethan hesitated, then made a decision. "I'm Ethan, by the way. Ethan Moore." She looked at him for a long moment. Then finally, "Rebecca. Rebecca Chen." "It's good to meet you, Rebecca." "You too, Ethan." She managed a small, broken smile. "Thank you. For this. For all of it. Anytime." He rejoined Sophie and they continued to school, but something had shifted. They had names now. They had stories. The careful distance they'd maintained had cracked, just slightly, letting something real seep through. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Ethan sat at his computer and searched for "paramedic died 3 years ago." He found several articles, but one stood out. "Local paramedic killed in Route 9 accident." He read it slowly, his heart sinking with each paragraph. The paramedic, Michael Chen, had been responding to a multi-car pileup when another vehicle lost control and struck him. He died at the scene, survived by his sister Rebecca and his parents. Ethan closed the browser, his hands shaking. Route 9. The same highway where Claire had died. The same accident. The same night. His mind reeled, trying to process the impossible coincidence. Rebecca's brother had been one of the first responders to the accident that killed his wife. Had been killed in the same incident. Their losses were connected, woven together by tragedy in ways neither of them had known. Should he tell her? Did she already know? Did it matter? Ethan sat in the dark, questions spinning through his head, no answers in sight. All he knew for certain was that tomorrow morning he would walk Sophie to school, and he would see Rebecca at her corner, and he would help her however she needed. Because that's what people did for each other. Even when, especially when, the world was broken and nothing made sense. They showed up. Again, and again, and again. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his mind churning through the impossible mathematics of coincidence. Route 9. December 27th, 3 years ago. The accident that had taken Claire had also taken Michael Chen, Rebecca's brother. The man who had responded to save lives had lost his own in the process. And now, without either of them knowing it, Ethan had been helping Michael's sister every morning for nearly 2 months. The universe had a cruel sense of poetry. At 3:47 a.m., Ethan gave up on sleep and went downstairs. He made coffee in the dark, standing at the kitchen window and watching snow fall in the streetlight's orange glow. The rational part of his brain told him this changed nothing. Rebecca didn't know about the connection, and maybe she never needed to. What good would it do to tell her that the man who helped her with her wheelchair every morning was the widower from her brother's last call? But another part of him, the part that had learned grief was a language with no translation, knew that secrets like this had weight. They pressed down on you until you couldn't breathe. Truth mattered, even when it hurt, especially when it hurt. He was still standing there when Sophie came downstairs at 6:30, earlier than usual, her rabbit tucked under one arm. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked, climbing onto a kitchen stool. "Nope." Ethan poured himself another cup of coffee and got Sophie her orange juice. "Bad dreams?" "Not really, just thinking." She took a sip of juice, her legs swinging beneath the stool. "About the lady, Rebecca." Ethan's chest tightened. "What about her?" "She was really sad yesterday. Like, really, really sad." Sophie set down her glass and looked at him with those eyes that saw too much. "Her brother died the same way Mom did, didn't he?" The question shouldn't have surprised him. Sophie was smart, observant, always connecting dots that other kids her age wouldn't even notice. But hearing her say it out loud still felt like a punch. "Yeah," Ethan said quietly. "Yeah, sweetheart. Same accident." Sophie nodded slowly, processing. "Does she know? About Mom?" "I don't think so. I told her I lost my wife 3 years ago, but I didn't give her details." "Are you going to tell her?" "I don't know yet." Ethan sat down across from her, cradling his coffee mug. "What do you think I should do?" Sophie was quiet for a long moment, her small face serious. Then she said, "Mom always told the truth, even when it was hard." "She did. So maybe you should too." Ethan reached across and squeezed her hand. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise. You just didn't notice because I'm short." Despite everything, Ethan laughed. It felt good, that laugh. Like a release valve on pressure that had been building all night. "Fair enough, come on, let's get you some breakfast. We've still got time." They went through their morning routine with the practiced efficiency of a drill team. Breakfast, backpack check, coats and scarves and gloves, because January in New England didn't mess around. At 7:32, they stepped out into air so cold it hurt to breathe, and began their walk. Ethan's heart was hammering as they approached the 5th block. He didn't know what he was going to say, or if he was going to say anything at all. Maybe he'd just help her with whatever she needed and keep walking. Maybe the right moment would present itself. Maybe there was no right moment for something like this. Rebecca was at her usual corner, but today she looked different. Calmer. Composed. She'd pulled herself back together after yesterday's breakdown, reassembled the armor she wore to face the world. When she saw them approaching, she offered a small smile. "Morning," she said. "Morning," Ethan replied. "How are you doing?" "Better. Thank you for yesterday. For just being there." "Of course." Ethan paused, the words he'd been rehearsing all night suddenly evaporating. Instead, he heard himself say, "Rebecca, can I ask you something?" She stiffened slightly but nodded. "Sure." "Your brother, Michael. He was a paramedic, you said?" "Yes." "Why?" Ethan's mouth went dry. Sophie's hand tightened in his, a tiny gesture of support. The accident he died in, was it on Route 9, December 27th? Rebecca's expression shifted, confusion giving way to something sharper. Yes. How did you know that? Because that's where my wife died. Same accident, same night. The words came out in a rush, unable to be held back any longer. I didn't realize it until last night. I looked it up and, Rebecca, your brother was one of the first responders. He was there when Claire died. The color drained from Rebecca's face. She sat frozen in her wheelchair, staring at him like he'd just spoken in a language she didn't understand. Several seconds passed in absolute silence, punctuated only by the sound of a car passing on the next street over. What? She finally whispered. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't know how to tell you, or even if I should tell you, but you were there? Rebecca's voice cracked. You were one of the victims from that night? My wife was. Claire. She was driving home from work and someone crossed the median and… Ethan stopped, the familiar story catching in his throat. Sophie and I were home. We got the call around 9 p.m. Rebecca's hands gripped the armrests of her wheelchair so tight her knuckles went white. Michael called me that night, right before. He said it was bad, that there were multiple casualties, that he might be late getting home, and then… She couldn't finish. And then he didn't come home, Ethan said softly. No, he didn't. Rebecca looked down at her lap, her breathing uneven. God, this whole time, every morning you've been helping me and I had no idea. I didn't either, not until yesterday when you told me about Michael. That's when I realized. Sophie, who had been silent through this entire exchange, suddenly spoke up. My mom was a nurse. She worked at Mercy Hospital. She was really nice and she made the best chocolate chip cookies, even though they were always a little too crispy on the edges. Rebecca looked at Sophie, really looked at her for the first time, and something in her expression crumbled. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I'm so sorry you lost your mom. I'm sorry you lost your brother, Sophie replied with a gravity that seemed impossible for a 9-year-old. The three of them stood there on that cold corner, bound together by tragedy in ways that defied explanation. Ethan didn't know what to say next, didn't know how to navigate this sudden collision of past and present. He just knew that this careful distance they'd maintained had been obliterated, and there was no going back. Finally, Rebecca took a shaky breath. I don't know what to do with this information. You don't have to do anything with it, Ethan said. I just thought you should know, that's all. Did Michael… Rebecca stopped, started again. Did he help her? Your wife? Was he able to help her? Ethan's throat closed up. He thought about the police report he'd read 100 times, about the paramedic who had stayed with Claire even as the scene deteriorated, who had held her hand in those final moments. He'd never known the paramedic's name. The reports had just listed him as M. Chen, Unit 47. I think so, Ethan managed. I think he was with her at the end. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. That sounds like Michael. He never left anyone alone. Ever. They stood in silence again, but this time it felt different. Less like strangers maintaining distance and more like survivors recognizing each other across a battlefield. I need to get Sophie to school, Ethan said eventually. But would you want to talk more? Maybe get coffee sometime? Rebecca hesitated, and Ethan could see the war happening behind her eyes. The instinct to pull away versus the desperate human need for connection, for understanding from someone who actually got it. Yeah, she said finally. Yeah, I'd like that. Tomorrow's Saturday. There's a cafe on Harrison Street, Daisy's. You know it? I know it. 10 a.m.? Okay. Rebecca wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Okay, I'll be there. Ethan nodded, feeling like he'd just made a commitment he didn't fully understand but knew was important. We should go. Come on, Soph. They walked the remaining 3 blocks to school in silence. Sophie didn't ask questions, didn't try to process what had just happened out loud. She just held his hand a little tighter, and when they reached the school gates, she hugged him longer than usual. You did the right thing, Dad, she whispered against his coat. I hope so. Mom would be proud. And then she was gone, disappearing into the crowd of students, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts and the weight of what he'd just set in motion. The next 24 hours crawled by. Ethan tried to work, tried to focus on the logo redesign he was supposed to be finishing for a client, but his mind kept drifting back to Rebecca, to Michael, to the impossible tangle of connections that had brought them together. He almost canceled the coffee meeting 3 times. What were they even going to talk about? How do you have a conversation with someone whose grief is permanently intertwined with your own? But each time he reached for his phone to text her, he'd gotten her number before they parted yesterday. He thought about Sophie's words. Mom would be proud. Claire had never run from difficult things. She'd always believed in facing them head on, and having the hard conversations, and choosing connection over comfort. So Ethan didn't cancel. Saturday morning arrived gray and cold. Ethan dropped Sophie off at his parents' house. They'd been begging to spend more time with their granddaughter, and this gave him a legitimate excuse to say yes, and headed to Daisy's cafe. He arrived 10 minutes early and ordered a black coffee he didn't really want, choosing a table near the window where he could watch for Rebecca. The cafe was busy with weekend traffic, families and couples and college students hunched over laptops. Normal people doing normal things, unburdened by the kind of conversation Ethan was about to have. At exactly 10 a.m., Rebecca appeared outside. She wasn't in her wheelchair. She was on crutches, moving slowly but deliberately, her face set with determination. Ethan stood up immediately and moved to the door, holding it open for her. "You didn't have to get up," she said, slightly out of breath. "Old habits." He gestured to the table. "Can I get you anything? Coffee? Tea?" "Coffee. Black. Thank you." Ethan ordered her coffee and returned to the table. Rebecca had lowered herself into the chair across from him, leaning the crutches against the wall. Up close, in better light than the pre-dawn corner where they usually met, he could see details he'd missed before. The faint scar above her eyebrow, the exhaustion carved into the lines around her eyes, the defiant set of her jaw that said she'd been fighting for a long time and was tired but not defeated. "I can use the wheelchair or the crutches," Rebecca said, noticing his glance. "Depends on the day, depends on the distance. The chair's more efficient, but the crutches make me feel less like the wheelchair defines you," Ethan offered. "Yeah." She accepted the coffee he slid across the table. "You get it. I get some of it. Different circumstances, but grief has a way of putting you in a box you didn't ask for. Widower, single father, the guy who lost his wife. It becomes your whole identity, whether you want it to or not." Rebecca nodded slowly. "Exactly. I'm the girl in the wheelchair now. That's all anyone sees. They don't see me before the accident, don't see who I was when I could walk without thinking about it." "How long has it been, if you don't mind me asking?" 8 months. Rebecca wrapped her hands around her coffee mug. "I was in a car accident, different one, not the same night as Michael. Just bad luck and black ice and a semi-truck that didn't stop in time." "Jesus." "Yeah." She took a sip of coffee. "Spinal injury, T12 fracture. The doctor said I might walk again someday with enough physical therapy, but that was before I gave up on therapy for 3 months because I couldn't see the point of trying." Ethan heard the self-recrimination in her voice. "And now?" "Now I'm trying again, started back 2 weeks ago." Rebecca met his eyes. "Because of you, actually." "Me?" "You and Sophie. Watching you every morning, seeing how you show up for her day after day, how you just keep going, even though I can see how hard it is." Rebecca's voice caught. "It reminded me that people keep going, even when everything's broken, even when it feels impossible. They just keep showing up." Ethan didn't know what to say to that. The idea that his daily struggle had meant something to someone else, had inspired anything beyond his own desperate attempt to hold his life together, was almost too much to process. "Michael would have liked you," Rebecca said suddenly. "He was like that too. Always helping people, always showing up when someone needed him." She paused. "Can you tell me about that night? About your wife?" Ethan's first instinct was to deflect, to change the subject, to protect the wound that had never quite healed. But he'd asked for this meeting. He'd opened this door. "Claire was driving home from a late shift at the hospital," he began. "She was a trauma nurse, worked nights mostly. It was snowing, roads were bad, but she'd driven in worse. I talked to her around 8:30. She said she'd be home in 20 minutes. He stopped, the familiar pain constricting his chest. She never made it. What happened? Driver coming the other way lost control, crossed the median, hit her head on. She died at the scene. The police said it was quick, that she probably didn't suffer, but I don't know if they just say that to make people feel better. Michael was there, Rebecca said quietly. He called me from the scene. I could hear it in his voice, how bad it was. He said there was a woman, a nurse, that they were doing everything they could, but she trailed off. But she was already gone, Ethan finished. And then another car lost control, came through the accident scene too fast, hit Michael and two other first responders. The other two survived. Michael didn't. They sat in silence, their coffees cooling between them, surrounded by the normal sounds of a cafe on a Saturday morning. But their table existed in a different space, a pocket of shared grief that separated them from the ordinary world. I read the police report so many times I memorized it, Ethan said. There was a paramedic listed as M. Chen who stayed with Claire. The report said he held her hand, talked to her, made sure she wasn't alone. I never knew who he was. Never thought I'd get the chance to thank him. Rebecca's eyes were wet. He would have done that. That was exactly who Michael was. Then thank you, on behalf of him, for making sure Claire wasn't alone at the end. And thank you for being there every morning, Rebecca said, for showing me what it looks like to keep going. I needed that more than you know. They talked for 2 hours, not just about the accident, but about everything. Rebecca told him about Michael growing up, about their parents who had fallen apart after his death and moved to Arizona to escape the memories. About her job as a graphic designer, the same field as Ethan, that she'd lost after the accident because she couldn't handle the stress of recovery and deadlines simultaneously. About the apartment she could barely afford, and the physical therapy that insurance only partially covered, and the daily fight to not give up entirely. Ethan told her about Sophie, about the weight of raising a daughter alone, about burned pancakes and forgotten permission slips, and the constant fear that he was screwing everything up. About the loneliness of grief, the way people stopped calling after the first few months, how loss carved a space around you that nobody else knew how to enter. They talked about Claire and Michael, about who they'd been and who they'd wanted to become, about the futures that had been stolen and the lives that kept moving forward without them. By the time they left the cafe, something had shifted. The careful distance was gone, replaced by something fragile and real. Not quite friendship yet. Too new for that, too raw. But the foundation of it. The possibility. Same time next week? Rebecca asked as they stood outside, her hands gripping her crutches. Yeah, I'd like that. And Ethan? Thank you for telling me about the connection. I know it wasn't easy. You deserve to know. Rebecca smiled, small but genuine. See you Monday morning, same corner. I'll be there. Ethan watched her make her way down the street, navigating the uneven sidewalk with practiced determination. Then he got in his car and sat there for a long moment, hands on the steering wheel, breathing through the complicated tangle of emotions in his chest. He'd opened a door he couldn't close, had woven his life together with Rebecca's in ways he still didn't fully understand. But somehow, impossibly, it felt right. The following Monday, their morning routine continued. But now, when Ethan helped Rebecca with her wheelchair, when he steadied her while she adjusted her bag or maneuvered around an icy patch, there was an unspoken understanding between them. They were no longer strangers performing a ritual. They were two people carrying impossible weight, helping each other bear it. Sophie noticed the change immediately. You seem different, she said as they walked the last 3 blocks to school. Different how? Lighter, like you're not carrying so much by yourself anymore. Ethan looked down at his daughter, once again struck by her perception. Maybe I'm not. Is Rebecca going to be your friend? I think maybe she already is. Sophie nodded, satisfied. Good. Everyone needs friends, especially grown-ups. You guys are bad at making them. Despite himself, Ethan laughed. We really are, aren't we? The weeks passed. January gave way to February, bitter cold softening into merely cold. Ethan and Rebecca met every Saturday at Daisy's Cafe, and their conversations ranged from the profound to the mundane. They talked about grief and therapy and the mechanics of survival, but they also talked about work and books and the absurdity of reality television. Rebecca had a sharp sense of humor hidden beneath her armor, and once Ethan learned how to find it, she made him laugh in a way he hadn't in years. One Saturday in late February, Rebecca showed up at the cafe without her crutches. She was in her wheelchair, but her face was glowing with an emotion Ethan couldn't quite identify. "I walked today," she announced as soon as she reached the table. I mean, really walked. Not just therapy walking with bars and a harness. I walked across my apartment, 15 feet, all by myself. Ethan felt something warm expand in his chest. "Rebecca, that's incredible." "I know." She was practically vibrating with excitement. "My therapist said if I keep progressing like this, I might be able to use just a cane in a few months. Maybe by summer I won't need the wheelchair at all, except for long distances." "That's amazing. I'm so proud of you." The words came out before Ethan could think about them, and for a moment he worried he'd overstepped. But Rebecca just smiled, wider than he'd ever seen. "Thank you for everything. I know I keep saying that, but I mean it. You reminded me why I should keep trying. You did the work. All I did was hold a door open." "No." Rebecca's expression turned serious. "You showed up. Every single day you showed up. Even when I was rude about it, even when I made it clear I didn't want help, you were there. That mattered. It still matters." Ethan didn't trust himself to speak, so he just nodded. They ordered their usual coffees and fell into easy conversation, but partway through, Rebecca's expression shifted. She set down her mug and looked at him with an intensity that made Ethan's pulse quicken. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Do you ever feel guilty for moving forward, for having good days?" Rebecca's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Because I do. Every time something good happens, every time I laugh or feel happy or go an hour without thinking about Michael, I feel like I'm betraying him somehow." Ethan exhaled slowly. "All the time. Especially in the beginning. Like if I wasn't actively grieving every minute, it meant I didn't love Claire enough. Like happiness was disrespectful to her memory." "Exactly." Rebecca looked relieved that he understood. "How did you get past it?" "I'm not sure I have completely, but Sophie helped. She needed me to be more than just a walking wound. She needed a father who could still find joy, who could still show her that life was worth living even after loss." Ethan paused. "And I think Claire would be furious if I spent the rest of my life being miserable. She'd want me to live, really live, not just survive." "Michael would too," Rebecca said softly. "He'd tell me to stop being stubborn and let people in. He'd say I was wasting time feeling guilty when I could be building something new. So why don't we? Why don't we what? Build something new. Not forgetting what we lost, but not letting it define us completely either." Ethan held her gaze. "We've both been stuck for 3 years. Maybe it's time to get unstuck." Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on her coffee mug. Then she nodded. "Okay. Yeah, let's do that. Starting with what?" "Starting with this friendship, or whatever it is. Let's stop apologizing for it. Let's stop feeling guilty for having one good thing in all this mess." "Deal." They shook hands across the table, a formal gesture that somehow felt momentous, like they were making a pact not just with each other, but with the future itself. As February turned to March, their friendship deepened. Rebecca started joining Ethan and Sophie for Sunday afternoon walks when the weather permitted. Sophie took to her immediately, showing her the book she was reading or asking her opinion on school drama with the same trust she'd once given only to Ethan. Watching them together did something to Ethan's heart, opened a door he'd thought was permanently sealed. One Sunday in mid-March, they went to the park. Sophie ran ahead to the playground while Ethan and Rebecca sat on a bench, watching her navigate the monkey bars with reckless confidence. "She's a great kid," Rebecca said. "She is. Sometimes I can't believe I had anything to do with creating someone that incredible." "You're a great dad, Ethan. Don't sell yourself short." He glanced at her. "You'd tell me if I was screwing it up, right?" "Absolutely. But you're not. You're showing up, you're present, you're trying. That's more than a lot of kids get." They watched Sophie in comfortable silence for a while. Then Rebecca said, "I've been thinking about getting back into design work. Freelance, like you, just small projects to start." That's great. You were really good before the accident? I was decent. Not amazing, but decent. She smiled wryly. I keep telling myself I need to get financially stable, build my career back up, all the practical stuff. But really, I just miss creating things. Miss having something to do with my hands besides physical therapy exercises. I could send some overflow work your way if you want. I've been turning down projects because I don't have the bandwidth. Rebecca turned to look at him. You do that? Why wouldn't I? You're talented, you need work, I need help. Seems like a win-win. You barely know my current skill level. So show me. Send me your portfolio. If it's good, we'll figure something out. And if it's not good, then I'll lie and tell you it's great anyway. Rebecca laughed, the sound bright and unexpected. You're a terrible liar, Ethan Moore. I know, Sophie tells me constantly. That week, Rebecca sent him her portfolio. It was more than good. It was excellent. Clean lines, creative solutions, exactly the kind of work Ethan's clients wanted. He immediately forwarded her 3 projects he'd been putting off, and within a week she'd completed them all ahead of schedule. Their professional collaboration fell into place as naturally as their friendship had. They started meeting at the cafe not just on Saturdays, but on Tuesday afternoons too, laptops open, bouncing ideas off each other. Rebecca's design aesthetic complemented Ethan's in unexpected ways, and together they produced work better than either could have alone. March became April. The snow melted, the trees began to bud, and the world shifted from winter gray to spring green. Rebecca progressed from wheelchair to crutches to a cane, moving through her physical recovery with a determination that amazed Ethan. She still had hard days, days when the pain was too much, when the frustration of her body's limitations overwhelmed her progress, but she kept going. And every morning, Ethan and Sophie still saw her at that same corner. Some mornings she needed help, some mornings she didn't. But the ritual remained, a constant in all their lives. One Tuesday in late April, as they sat at Daisy's working on a particularly complex logo redesign, Rebecca's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and her expression went carefully neutral. I need to take this. It's my mom. Go ahead. Rebecca answered, and Ethan tried not to listen, focusing on his laptop screen. But he couldn't help hearing her side of the conversation, the clipped, careful responses, the way her voice went flat and distant. I'm fine, Mom. Yes, I'm going to therapy. No, I don't need you to come back. I said I'm fine. A long pause. Look, I have to go. I'm working. I'll call you later. Another pause. Okay, love you too. Bye. She hung up and sat staring at her phone for a moment before setting it face down on the table. Everything okay? Ethan asked carefully. My mother wants to fly back to check on me, make sure I'm really okay, and not just saying it. Rebecca's laugh was bitter. She calls once a month, asks the same questions, gets the same answers, and then goes back to pretending I don't exist. That's rough. It's fine. I'm used to it. But her voice said it wasn't fine, that she'd never be used to it. Ethan closed his laptop. Rebecca, can I say something that might be overstepping? When has that ever stopped you? Fair point. He took a breath. Your parents abandoned you when you needed them most. After Michael died, they left. After your accident, they stayed away. That's not okay. You're allowed to be angry about it. Rebecca's jaw tightened. They were grieving. They needed space. And what about what you needed? You lost your brother too, and then you almost died. And instead of being there for you, they ran away and left you to deal with everything alone. Ethan, I'm not saying you have to cut them off or anything, but you don't have to pretend it doesn't hurt. You don't have to make excuses for them. For a moment, Ethan thought he'd pushed too far. Rebecca's expression was unreadable, her hands clenched in her lap. Then, slowly, her eyes filled with tears. I'm so angry at them, she whispered, all the time. I'm so angry that they left, that they get to run away and start over while I'm here dealing with all of it by myself. And I hate that I'm angry because they're my parents, and they lost their son, and I should be more understanding. You can be understanding and still angry. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. Rebecca wiped her eyes roughly. God, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to fall apart in public. You're not falling apart. You're just being honest. There's a difference. She looked at him, really looked at him, and Ethan saw something shift in her expression, something vulnerable and frightened and hopeful all at once. "How did we get here?" she asked softly. "What do you mean?" "This, us. How did helping me with my wheelchair turn into whatever this is?" Ethan thought about it. "I think we were both drowning and we found someone else who understood what that felt like, and maybe that made the drowning a little less lonely." "Are we still drowning?" "I don't know. Maybe. But I think we're swimming now too, at least some of the time." Rebecca smiled through her tears. Yeah, I think you're right." They packed up their laptops and left the cafe together, stepping out into warm April sunshine. Spring was here, unmistakable and insistent. The world was waking up, and for the first time in 3 years, Ethan felt like maybe he was waking up too. The morning arrived with rain, heavy and relentless, the kind that turned streets into rivers and made visibility almost non-existent. Ethan stood at the kitchen window watching water sheet down the glass while Sophie ate her cereal behind him, unusually quiet for a Friday morning. "We could drive today," Ethan said, though even as he spoke the words felt wrong. They'd walked every day for 3 years, rain or shine, snow or heat. Breaking the routine felt like surrendering something important. "Rebecca will be there," Sophie said simply, not looking up from her bowl. "I know. She'll be waiting for us." Ethan turned to face his daughter. "You really think so, in this weather?" Sophie finally looked up, her dark eyes serious. "She's always there, Dad. Always." And she was right. When they stepped out into the downpour at 7:32, both bundled in raincoats, Sophie's bright yellow and Ethan's dark navy, the world was gray and wet and miserable. But when they reached the 5th block, Rebecca was at her corner. She was in her wheelchair today, a clear plastic poncho draped over herself in the chair, rain streaming off the edges. She looked cold and uncomfortable and completely unsurprised to see them. "Morning?" she called out over the sound of rain hammering the pavement. "You're insane," Ethan called back, jogging the last few feet to her. "It's pouring." "I know, so are you, apparently." But she was smiling, water dripping from her hair into her eyes. "The pharmacy doesn't open for another 15 minutes. I got here too early." "Come on." Ethan looked around, spotting the overhang of a closed shop half a block down. "Let's get out of this." He pushed her wheelchair through the rain while Sophie ran ahead, all three of them laughing at the absurdity of it by the time they reached shelter. They stood under the narrow overhang, catching their breath, watching rain bounce off the sidewalk in front of them. "This is ridiculous," Rebecca said, but she was still smiling. "We're all going to get pneumonia." "Probably." Ethan squeezed water from the bottom of his coat. "But at least we'll get it together." Sophie giggled at that, and Rebecca joined in, and suddenly they were all laughing harder than the situation warranted, the kind of laughter that comes from tension release and shared absurdity, and the simple joy of not being alone in the storm. When the laughter faded, they stood in comfortable silence, listening to rain drum against the overhang above them. Ethan glanced at Rebecca and found her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "What?" he asked. "I was just thinking about something Michael used to say. He said the people who show up in the rain are the ones you keep." She paused. "You've shown up in the rain a lot, Ethan Moore." "So have you, Rebecca Chen." "Yeah." She looked out at the downpour. "I guess I have." They waited another 10 minutes until the pharmacy lights flickered on inside. Ethan pushed Rebecca to the door, held it open while she maneuvered through, then turned to Sophie. "We're going to be late," he said. "I know. It's okay." They walked the remaining blocks quickly, arriving at school 7 minutes past the bell. Sophie hugged him without being asked, water squelching between them. "See you at 3:15, she said. "See you then, sweetheart. Love you." "Love you too, Dad." Ethan walked home alone through streets that were beginning to empty as the rain finally started to ease. His mind kept circling back to what Rebecca had said. The people who show up in the rain are the ones you keep. It was such a simple statement, but it carried weight that Ethan felt settling into his chest. He'd spent 3 years existing in a holding pattern, going through motions, maintaining routines because structure was easier than feeling. But somewhere in the past 4 months, something had shifted. Rebecca had shifted it. Their friendship, because that's what it was now, undeniably, had cracked open a door Ethan had assumed was sealed forever. The following Saturday at Daisy's Cafe, Rebecca arrived early. Ethan found her already seated at their usual table, 2 coffees waiting. But her expression was different today, tense, almost nervous. "Hey," Ethan said, sliding into the chair across from her. "Everything okay?" "I need to tell you something." Rebecca's hands were wrapped around her coffee mug so tightly her knuckles were white. "And I need you to just listen until I'm done, okay? Because if I stop, I might not be able to start again." Ethan's stomach tightened with sudden anxiety. "Okay." Rebecca took a breath. "After Michael died, I went through his things, his apartment, his locker at the station, all of it. And I found this journal he kept, not like a diary, just notes about calls that affected him. The ones he couldn't shake." Ethan sat very still, beginning to understand where this was going. There was an entry from that night, December 27th, 3 years ago. Rebecca's voice was shaking now. About a car accident on Route 9. About a nurse who died even though he tried everything to save her. About her husband who arrived at the hospital and fell apart when they told him she was gone. She finally looked up, meeting Ethan's eyes. About a little girl in a yellow coat who kept asking when Mommy was coming home. The air left Ethan's lungs in a rush. "Rebecca, wait, please." She held up a hand. Michael wrote that he couldn't stop thinking about that family, about the man who had to tell his daughter that her mother wasn't coming home. He wrote that it was the worst call of his career and that he was haunted by the image of that father holding his daughter in the hospital waiting room, refusing to fall apart because she needed him to be strong. Tears were streaming down Rebecca's face now, but she kept talking. "That father was you, Ethan, and that little girl was Sophie. And my brother died that night still thinking about you, still carrying the weight of not being able to save your wife." Her voice broke completely. "And I didn't tell you because I didn't know how. Because I found that journal entry 2 weeks after we met at the cafe, and I've been carrying it ever since, not knowing if you'd want to know or if it would just make everything worse." Ethan couldn't speak, couldn't move. The world had narrowed to Rebecca's face across the table, to the words hanging in the air between them, to the weight of connection that went even deeper than he'd imagined. "I'm sorry," Rebecca whispered. "I'm so sorry I didn't tell you sooner." Finally, Ethan found his voice. Can I see it? The entry?" Rebecca nodded and pulled out her phone, scrolling to a photo she'd apparently kept ready. She handed the phone across the table with trembling hands. The image showed a page from a notebook, Michael's handwriting neat and precise. Ethan read it slowly, each word landing like a physical blow. December 27th, Route 9 MVA, multiple casualties. Lost a patient tonight, female, early 30s, nurse from Mercy Hospital, Claire Moore. Did everything we could, but injuries were too severe. Her husband showed up at the hospital an hour later with their daughter, maybe 6 years old, yellow coat, holding a stuffed rabbit. Watched him get the news. Watched him fall apart, and then pull himself back together because his daughter was watching. Most devastating thing I've ever seen. Keep thinking about him, about that little girl asking when mommy's coming home, about families that get destroyed in seconds by drunk drivers and bad luck. Can't shake this one. Below that, written in what looked like a different pen, added later. Keep thinking about the widower and his daughter. Hope they're okay. Hope he's managing. Nobody should have to go through that alone. Ethan's hands were shaking as he handed the phone back. He thought about us. All the time, from what I can tell. That entry wasn't the only mention. He brought you up in later entries too, wondering how you were doing, hoping you'd found support. Rebecca wiped her eyes. Michael never stopped carrying his patients with him, especially the ones he couldn't save. They sat in silence, the noise of the cafe washing over them like water. Ethan felt something enormous shifting inside his chest, some fundamental understanding of the interconnectedness of grief and survival, and the invisible threads that bound people together across tragedy. That night at the hospital, Ethan said slowly, I remember a paramedic talking to Sophie, telling her that her mom had been brave, that she'd helped a lot of people in her life, that she'd want Sophie to be brave too. His voice cracked. Was that Michael? Rebecca nodded, unable to speak. He saved her, Rebecca. Not Claire. He couldn't save Claire. But he saved Sophie. She held on to those words for months afterward. Whenever she was scared or sad, she'd repeat them. Mommy would want me to be brave. That was Michael. God. Rebecca pressed her hands to her face. I didn't know. I didn't know he talked to her. He gave my daughter something to hold on to when her entire world had shattered. That matters. That will always matter. They reached across the table simultaneously, their hands meeting in the middle and gripping tight. Two people bound by loss and survival, by a connection that had existed long before they'd ever met on that corner, by a debt of gratitude that could never be repaid but could be honored. Thank you for telling me, Ethan said. I know it wasn't easy. I was terrified, Rebecca admitted. Terrified you'd be angry that I kept it from you, or that knowing would make everything worse. It doesn't make it worse. It makes it… Ethan struggled for the right word. Real. More real. Like Claire and Michael are still here somehow, still part of this. They are here, Rebecca said softly. They're in every morning you help me with my wheelchair. In every Saturday we spend talking. In every moment we choose to keep going instead of giving up. They're woven into everything we do. Ethan felt tears on his own face now, but they didn't feel like grief. They felt like release, like finally understanding something that had been just out of reach. I need to show you something, he said suddenly. Not now, but soon. Will you come over for dinner tomorrow, you and me and Sophie? Rebecca hesitated, and Ethan could see the fear flash across her face. Dinner at his house was different from meeting at a cafe. It was more intimate, more real, crossing a boundary they'd been carefully maintaining. But then she nodded. Okay, yes, what time? 6 o'clock. I'll make something that isn't burned, probably. She laughed, the sound watery but genuine. I have low expectations. Smart woman. The next evening, Rebecca arrived at Ethan's house at exactly 6 o'clock. She was using her cane today, walking slowly but steadily up the path to the front door. Ethan watched from the window, Sophie beside him, both of them suddenly nervous for reasons neither could articulate. She's going to like the house, right? Sophie asked. I think so, and if she doesn't, she's polite enough to lie about it. Sophie giggled, and that broke the tension. Ethan opened the door before Rebecca could knock. Welcome, he said. Fair warning, I attempted to cook actual food. It may or may not be edible. I brought wine just in case, Rebecca replied, holding up a bottle, for medicinal purposes. Sophie helped Rebecca with her coat while Ethan led them to the living room. It was small but comfortable, decorated with a mix of furniture that had clearly been accumulated over time rather than chosen with any coherent design plan. Photos lined the mantel and walls. Sophie at various ages, Ethan and Claire on their wedding day, family gatherings and holidays and ordinary moments frozen in time. Rebecca moved slowly through the room, studying the photos with an intensity that made Ethan's chest tight. She stopped in front of the wedding photo, staring at Claire's face. She was beautiful, Rebecca said quietly. She was. Ethan came to stand beside her. That was taken 8 years ago. We got married in her parents' backyard because we were broke and didn't care about anything fancy. You both look so happy. We were. Ethan smiled at the memory. Completely broke and totally happy. Sophie tugged on Rebecca's sleeve. Want to see my room? I cleaned it and everything. Rebecca looked to Ethan for permission, and he nodded. Go ahead. Dinner won't be ready for 20 minutes anyway. He listened to them climb the stairs, Sophie's chatter filling the house with sound it hadn't held in too long. Then he returned to the kitchen and checked on the chicken he was attempting to roast. It looked edible. Maybe even good. Small victories. When Sophie and Rebecca came back downstairs, Sophie was carrying a shoebox that Ethan recognized immediately. His heart jumped. Soph, what are you doing? Showing Rebecca. Sophie set the box on the coffee table and looked at him with that expression that said she'd made a decision and wasn't backing down. Is that okay? Ethan wanted to say no. Wanted to protect the contents of that box, keep them private, not share them with someone who hadn't been part of that life. But he looked at Rebecca's curious, gentle expression and found himself nodding instead. Yeah, it's okay. Sophie opened the box carefully, reverently. Inside were mementos from Claire's life. Her hospital ID badge, a pressed flower from their wedding bouquet, birthday cards she'd written to Sophie before she died, small treasures that meant everything. "This is Mommy," Sophie said, pulling out a photo and handing it to Rebecca. "She's holding me when I was a baby." Rebecca took the photo with careful hands, studying it. "You have her eyes." "Everyone says that." Sophie beamed. "And Dad says I have her stubborn streak." "That's not a bad thing to inherit." Rebecca looked through a few more items, handling each one like it might break. Then she paused, her expression shifting. "Sophie, can I tell you something about my brother?" "Okay." "He was there when your mom died. He was one of the paramedics who tried to help her." Rebecca glanced at Ethan, who nodded encouragement. "And he wanted you to know that your mom was brave, even at the very end. He told you that at the hospital, remember?" Sophie's eyes went wide. "That was your brother?" "Yes. I remember him. He had nice eyes. And he let me hold his flashlight while we waited." Sophie's voice got very small. "He was really nice to me. He was good at that, being kind to people when they needed it most." Rebecca's own voice was thick with emotion. "And I think he'd be really happy to know that you're doing okay, that you and your dad are taking care of each other." Sophie thought about this for a moment, then moved closer to Rebecca and hugged her. It was spontaneous and fierce, and Rebecca froze for just a second before wrapping her arms around the little girl and holding on tight. Ethan had to turn away, overwhelmed by the image of his daughter embracing the sister of the man who'd been there in Claire's final moments. The connections were too much, too perfect, too impossible to be anything but fate. Dinner was surprisingly good. They ate at the small kitchen table, passing dishes and talking about everything and nothing. Sophie told Rebecca about her upcoming science fair project, about the boy at school who'd finally stopped stealing her erasers, about the book series she was reading. Rebecca listened with genuine interest, asking questions and offering opinions, slipping into the rhythm of their little family as if she'd always been part of it. After dinner, while Sophie was upstairs getting ready for bed, Ethan and Rebecca cleaned up together. They worked in comfortable silence, falling into an easy division of labor, until Rebecca spoke. "This feels dangerous," she said quietly. Ethan looked up from the dish he was washing. "What does?" "This. Being here, feeling like I fit." She set down the plate she'd been drying. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for this to turn out to be too good to be true. What if it's not? What if it's just real? I don't know if I can trust that yet." Ethan dried his hands and turned to face her fully. "Rebecca, I spent 3 years believing I'd never feel connected to another adult again, that the best I could hope for was going through the motions and being there for Sophie. And then you showed up at that corner and you needed help, and somehow helping you became the thing that reminded me I was still alive. Ethan, I'm not saying this to pressure you or make you uncomfortable. I just need you to know that you being here, you being part of our lives, it's not too good to be true. It's just good. And that's okay. We're allowed to have good things, even after everything we've lost." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "What if I screw it up? What if I let you down?" "Then we'll figure it out, same as we've been figuring everything else out." Ethan took a step closer. "You don't have to be perfect, Rebecca. You just have to be here." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I can do that. I think I can do that." "Good." Ethan smiled. "Because Sophie's already decided you're staying. And trust me, you don't want to argue with her. She's got her mother's stubborn streak." That made Rebecca laugh through her tears, and the tension broke. Sophie appeared in the doorway in her pajamas, her rabbit tucked under one arm. "Rebecca, will you help me with my bedtime story? Dad always does the voices wrong." "I do not do the voices wrong," Ethan protested. "You really do, Dad. It's kind of embarrassing." Rebecca grinned. "I'd love to help with the story. Lead the way." Ethan watched them climb the stairs together, Sophie chattering about the book they were reading, Rebecca listening patiently. He stood in his kitchen, surrounded by the comfortable mess of a shared meal, feeling something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope. When Rebecca came back downstairs 20 minutes later, her expression was soft. "She's out. Fell asleep halfway through chapter 3. She always does. It's her thing. Ethan handed Rebecca a cup of coffee. Thank you for reading to her. Thank you for letting me. Rebecca accepted the cup and moved to the living room, settling onto the couch with a sigh. Your daughter is extraordinary. I know. I have no idea how I got that lucky. You're doing a great job with her, Ethan, in case nobody's told you that recently. Most days it doesn't feel like it. That's because you're doing it right. The parents who think they have it all figured out are usually the ones screwing it up. Rebecca took a sip of coffee. My parents thought they had it all figured out, right up until they didn't. Ethan sat down beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them on the couch. Have they called recently? My mom, yeah. Same conversation as always. She asks if I'm okay. I say yes. She expresses concern from 2,000 miles away. I tell her not to worry. We both pretend everything's fine. Do you want them to come back, to be more involved? Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. I used to. Right after the accident, I desperately wanted them here. But they made it clear that wasn't going to happen, and at some point I had to accept it and move on. She looked at him. I think I've built a better support system without them anyway. Yeah? Yeah. I've got a stubborn graphic designer who refuses to let me struggle alone, and his daughter who gives the best hugs I've ever received, and a physical therapist who yells at me when I slack off. She smiled. It's not what I expected, but it works. I'm glad we could be part of that. You're not just part of it, Ethan. You're the foundation of it. You showed me it was possible to keep going, to rebuild after everything falls apart. Ethan didn't know what to say to that, so he just reached over and took her hand. She laced her fingers through his without hesitation, and they sat like that for a while, drinking coffee and not talking, just being present with each other. Eventually, Rebecca glanced at the clock and sighed. I should go. It's getting late. Let me drive you. You shouldn't take the bus this late. Ethan, I live 20 minutes away. I'll be fine. I know you'll be fine, but I want to drive you anyway. Rebecca looked like she might argue, then surrendered. Okay. Thank you. They drove through quiet streets, the radio playing softly between them. When they pulled up outside Rebecca's apartment building, she didn't get out right away. Can I ask you something? She said. Always. Do you ever think about the future? Like actual plans beyond just getting through each day? Ethan considered the question. Not really. For 3 years, my only plan has been survive until tomorrow. Why? Because I've been thinking about it lately. About what comes next. About building something instead of just surviving. She looked at him in the dim light from the street lamp. And I think maybe I want you to be part of that future. You and Sophie. If that's okay? Ethan's heart was pounding. That's more than okay. Good. Rebecca smiled, then leaned over and kissed his cheek quickly, before either of them could overthink it. Thank you for dinner, and for everything else. Anytime. She got out of the car, and Ethan waited until she was safely inside the building before driving away. His cheek still tingled where she'd kissed it, and he couldn't stop smiling. The next morning was Sunday. No school rush, no rigid schedule. Ethan made pancakes that were only slightly burned while Sophie set the table. They were halfway through breakfast when Sophie spoke. Dad, do you like Rebecca? Ethan nearly choked on his coffee. What kind of question is that? A normal one. Do you like her? Like her? Soph, we're friends. Good friends. Sophie gave him a look that was far too knowing for a 9-year-old. Mom would want you to be happy. You know that, right? The pancake Ethan had been cutting suddenly became very interesting. I know that. Rebecca makes you happy. I can tell. She does. But it's complicated. Why? Because... Ethan struggled for words that would make sense to a child. Because Mom was everything to me, and even though she's gone, it feels wrong to care about someone else that way. Sophie thought about this while chewing her pancake. Then she said, in my book, there's a character whose mom dies, and later his dad falls in love again. And the kid asks his dad if he still loves his mom, and the dad says yes, that you can love someone who's gone and still make room for someone new. That love doesn't run out. Ethan stared at his daughter, wondering when she'd become so wise. That's a pretty smart book. It's a good series. You should read it. Sophie took another bite. I like Rebecca, and I think she likes us, and I think Mom would like her too. You do? Yeah, because Rebecca helps people, just like Mom did, just like you do. Sophie reached across the table and patted his hand. It's okay to be happy, Dad. You don't have to feel guilty about it. Ethan pulled his daughter into a hug, overwhelmed by her emotional intelligence and her big heart and her ability to see things clearly when he was too tangled up in his own fear and grief to manage it. When did you get so smart? He whispered into her hair. I've always been smart. You just didn't notice because I'm short. Ethan laughed, the sound filling the kitchen with warmth. That afternoon, his phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. Thank you for last night, for letting me into your home and your life. It meant more than I can say. He typed back, thank you for being someone worth letting in. Her response came quickly. Same time Monday morning? Wouldn't miss it. And on Monday morning, when they reached the 5th block, Rebecca was waiting at her corner, just like always. But this time when Ethan helped her navigate a crack in the sidewalk, when their hands touched and their eyes met, something had shifted. The careful distance was gone, replaced by something warmer and more real. They were building something new from the broken pieces of their old lives, something that honored the people they'd lost while making space for the people they were becoming. And for the first time in 3 years, that felt like enough. April gave way to May, and with it came a warmth that seemed to seep into everything. The mornings were lighter now, birdsong replacing the silent gray of winter, and the trees along their walking route had burst into full bloom. But the most significant change wasn't in the weather. It was in the way Ethan felt when he woke up each morning, no longer dreading the day ahead, but actually looking forward to it. Rebecca had become a constant presence in their lives. She joined them for dinner twice a week, helped Sophie with her science project, collaborated with Ethan on design work that was bringing in more money than he'd made in years. And somewhere in all of that, without either of them explicitly acknowledging it, she'd stopped being just a friend and started being something more. It was Sophie who forced the conversation neither adult seemed ready to have. They were at the park on a Saturday afternoon, Ethan and Rebecca sitting on a bench while Sophie played on the swings. Rebecca had progressed to the point where she rarely needed her wheelchair anymore, using only a cane for longer distances or particularly difficult terrain. The transformation over the past 6 months had been remarkable, and Ethan never stopped being proud of her determination. Dad, Sophie called from the swings. Rebecca, watch this. They both looked up as Sophie launched herself off the swing at the height of its arc, landing in the mulch with a triumphant whoop. Ethan's heart nearly stopped, but Sophie popped up unharmed, grinning. Please don't do that again, Ethan called back, his voice tight with parental anxiety. But I stuck the landing! You also could have broken your neck. Sophie rolled her eyes and ran off toward the monkey bars, leaving Ethan and Rebecca shaking their heads. She's fearless, Rebecca said. I don't know if that's a good thing or a terrifying thing. Both, definitely both. Ethan watched his daughter navigate the monkey bars with ease. She gets that from Claire. Her mom was the brave one. I'm just the guy who worries about everything. You're braver than you think. Rebecca's hand found his on the bench between them, their fingers intertwining naturally. You rebuilt your entire life after losing your wife. You raised an incredible daughter alone. You show up every single day, even when it's hard. That's brave, Ethan. He looked down at their joined hands, still marveling at how right it felt. I had help, especially these last few months. We helped each other. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Sophie play, until she came running back to the bench, breathless and flushed. Are you two dating? She asked without preamble. Rebecca choked on air, and Ethan felt his face go hot. Sophie, that's not... Because if you are, that's okay. I just want to know so I'm not confused. Sophie looked between them with complete seriousness. You hold hands all the time now, and Rebecca stays for dinner a lot. And last week I heard you laughing on the phone at midnight, which means you were talking to each other because you don't have any other friends. I have other friends, Ethan protested weakly. Name one. He couldn't, which proved Sophie's point entirely. Rebecca was trying very hard not to laugh. The thing is, Sophie continued, warming to her subject, I think it would be good if you were dating because you're both happier when you're together, and Mom would want you to be happy. She told me that before she died. Ethan's throat went tight. She did? Yeah. When she was sick that last time, before the accident, she said that if anything ever happened to her, you should find someone who makes you smile again. She made me promise to remind you of that someday. Sophie's eyes were suspiciously bright. So I'm reminding you. Rebecca's hand squeezed his, and when Ethan looked at her, he saw tears on her cheeks matching the ones he could feel on his own. Your mom was a smart lady, Rebecca said softly to Sophie. I know. Sophie climbed onto the bench between them, worming her way into the space they'd left. So are you dating or not? Ethan and Rebecca looked at each other over Sophie's head. He saw his own uncertainty reflected back at him, mixed with hope and fear, and something that looked a lot like love. I don't know, Ethan admitted. We haven't really talked about it. Well, maybe you should talk about it, because I have a field trip next Friday, and I need to know who to put down as my emergency contact. I was going to put Rebecca, but only if she's going to stick around. I'm sticking around, Rebecca said immediately. Dating or not, I'm not going anywhere. Good. Sophie hugged her quickly, then bounced off the bench. I'm going to go on the slide. You two should probably talk now. She ran off again, leaving two adults staring at each other in the wake of a 9-year-old's blunt honesty. She's not subtle, Ethan said. No, she's not, Rebecca laughed, wiping her eyes. But she's not wrong either. We should probably talk about this. Yeah, we probably should. Ethan took a breath, trying to organize thoughts that had been swirling in his head for weeks. Rebecca, I care about you. A lot. More than I thought I could care about anyone again. But I'm terrified of screwing this up. So am I. And I don't know how to do this. How to move forward without feeling like I'm betraying Claire's memory. How to make space for something new when I'm still carrying so much old grief. Rebecca shifted on the bench to face him fully. Can I tell you what I've learned in the past 6 months? Please. Grief doesn't go away. It doesn't get smaller or easier or more manageable. It just becomes part of you, like a scar that never quite fades. She paused, choosing her words carefully. But that doesn't mean we can't build new things around it. We can honor the people we lost and still move forward. We can love them forever and still make room for new love. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. It's terrifying and complicated and messy, but I think it's worth it. Rebecca's voice dropped to almost a whisper. I think we're worth it. Ethan felt something crack open in his chest, some final wall he'd been maintaining crumbling under the weight of her honesty. I want this. Us. Whatever this is or could be. I want it. So do I. But I need to go slow. I need time to figure out how to do this without falling apart. Ethan, we've been going slow for 6 months. We've been dating without calling it dating since January. All I'm asking is that we acknowledge what's already happening. She was right, and they both knew it. The friendship had shifted weeks ago, maybe even months ago. They'd just been too scared to name it. Okay, Ethan said. Okay, we're dating. Officially. Is that what you want to hear? Rebecca's smile was radiant. Yes, that's exactly what I want to hear. She leaned in and kissed him, soft and brief and perfect. It was their first real kiss, and it felt like coming home and stepping into the unknown all at once. When they pulled apart, Sophie was standing 10 feet away, grinning. Finally, she shouted. I was starting to think I'd have to lock you in a closet or something. How long have you been standing there? Ethan called back. Long enough? Can we get ice cream now? This calls for ice cream. They got ice cream, the three of them sitting outside the shop on a bench, watching the world go by. Sophie chattered about her field trip while Ethan and Rebecca sat close enough that their shoulders touched, their free hands intertwined. It felt natural. It felt right. And for the first time in 3 years, Ethan allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he deserved this kind of happiness. That night, after Sophie was in bed, Ethan called Rebecca. She picked up on the second ring. Hey, she said, her voice soft. Everything okay? Yeah, I just wanted to hear your voice. We were together 3 hours ago. I know, but Sophie was right. I do call you at midnight. He paused. Is that weird? No, it's sweet. He could hear the smile in her voice. I like that I'm the person you want to talk to at the end of the day. You're the person I want to talk to at the beginning of the day, too. And the middle. Pretty much all the time, actually. Ethan Moore, are you being romantic? I'm trying. I'm rusty at this. You're doing great. Rebecca's voice went quieter. Can I tell you something? Always. I'm scared. Not of us, but of how much this matters. I haven't let myself care about someone like this since before Michael died, and losing him nearly destroyed me. The thought of caring that much again, of having that much to lose, I know. I feel the same way. Ethan sat down on his bed, the phone pressed to his ear. But I think we're already there, Rebecca. We already care that much. Admitting it doesn't change the risk. It just makes us honest about what we're risking. She was quiet for a moment. When did you get so wise? I have a very smart 9-year-old who keeps teaching me things. That made Rebecca laugh, the sound easing the tension. They talked for another hour, about nothing and everything, until Ethan's eyes were heavy and Rebecca's voice had gone drowsy. When they finally hung up, Ethan lay in the dark feeling something he'd almost forgotten was possible. Contentment. The next few weeks unfolded with a new ease. Ethan and Rebecca stopped pretending their relationship was anything other than what it was. They still met every morning at the corner, but now the help Ethan offered came with a quick kiss on the cheek. Rebecca started keeping a toothbrush at Ethan's house. Sophie started calling her Becca instead of Rebecca, a nickname that made Rebecca tear up the first time she heard it. They were building something real, and it terrified both of them in the best possible way. One evening in late May, Rebecca was helping Sophie with homework at the kitchen table while Ethan cooked dinner. He could hear them talking, Sophie explaining her math problem while Rebecca patiently walked her through the solution. The domesticity of it all hit Ethan like a wave, and he had to grip the counter for a moment, overwhelmed. This was what he'd lost when Claire died. Not just a wife, but a partner, someone to share the daily weight of parenting, the small joys and frustrations that made up a life. He'd been doing it alone for so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like to have backup. "Dad, the pasta's boiling over," Sophie called out. Ethan jerked back to awareness and rescued the pasta, draining it quickly. When he turned around, Rebecca was standing in the doorway, watching him with a knowing expression. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah, just thinking." "About?" "About how grateful I am that you're here." Rebecca crossed the kitchen and wrapped her arms around him from behind, her head resting against his back. "I'm grateful too, for you, for Sophie, for all of this." They stood like that for a long moment, just breathing together, until Sophie appeared and made gagging noises. "You guys are gross," she announced, but she was smiling. Dinner was chaotic and wonderful, all three of them talking over each other and laughing at stupid jokes. Afterward, they played a board game that Sophie won through a combination of strategy and outrageous luck. When it was time for bed, Sophie hugged Rebecca goodnight and then looked at Ethan with a serious expression. "Is Rebecca sleeping over?" she asked. Ethan and Rebecca both froze. They'd been careful about that, maintaining separate spaces even as their relationship deepened. It was one thing to acknowledge they were dating, it was another to navigate the complexities of blending their lives completely. "Not tonight," Rebecca said gently, "but maybe sometimes, if that's okay with you." Sophie considered this. "It's okay with me. I like having you here. I like being here." After Sophie was in bed, Ethan and Rebecca sat on the couch, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. The TV was on, but neither was watching it. "We need to talk about the future," Rebecca said quietly. "What about it?" "About what this looks like long term. About where we're going." She sat up to look at him directly. "I'm falling in love with you, Ethan. With you and Sophie and this life you've let me into. And I need to know if you're falling too, or if I'm alone in this." Ethan's heart was pounding. The L word. They hadn't said it yet, had been dancing around it for weeks. But hearing it out loud made it real in a way nothing else had. "You're not alone," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm falling too. Have been for months, probably. I'm just scared of what happens when we hit the ground." "What if we don't hit the ground? What if we fly instead?" "Is that an option?" "I don't know, but I'd like to find out." Rebecca took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "I know this is complicated, I know we both have baggage and scars and reasons to be careful, but I don't want to be careful anymore, Ethan. I want to be brave. I want to choose this, choose us, and see where it goes. Ethan thought about Claire, about the promise he'd made at her funeral to take care of Sophie and honor her memory. He thought about the 3 years he'd spent in survival mode, convinced that the best he could hope for was making it through each day intact. And then he thought about the past 6 months, about morning walks and Saturday coffees, and the way Rebecca had brought light back into corners of his life that had been dark for so long. Claire would want this for him. She'd want him to be happy, to build a new life, to show Sophie that love didn't end with loss. She'd want him to be brave. Okay, Ethan said. Okay, let's be brave. Rebecca kissed him then, deep and real and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. I love you, she whispered. I love you, and I love Sophie, and I love the life we're building together. I love you too. The words came easier than Ethan expected, like they'd been waiting just beneath the surface all along. And I'm terrified and excited and completely out of my depth, but I love you. That's enough. That's more than enough. They stayed up late that night, talking through the logistics of what their relationship would look like going forward. Rebecca's lease was up in 2 months. They could look for a place together, or she could move in here, or they could maintain separate spaces for a while longer. There were no easy answers, but for the first time, they were asking the questions together. Around midnight, Rebecca called a car to take her home. Ethan walked her to the door, reluctant to let her go, even though he'd see her again in less than 8 hours. Tomorrow morning, she said. Same corner. I'll be there. I know you will. You always are. She kissed him one more time, and then she was gone, and Ethan was alone in his house with a heart that felt too big for his chest. The next morning arrived with the kind of perfect spring weather that made everything feel possible. Ethan and Sophie left the house at 7:32, right on schedule, walking through streets that were familiar and comfortable and home. When they reached the 5th block, Rebecca was waiting, but something was different. She wasn't in her wheelchair or using her cane. She was standing completely unsupported, a huge smile on her face. Look, she said as they approached. No cane. My physical therapist cleared me yesterday. As long as I take it easy, I can walk without assistance now. Sophie shrieked with joy and ran to hug her. Ethan followed more slowly, his eyes stinging with tears he didn't try to hide. Rebecca, that's incredible. I know. I can't believe it. 6 months ago, I thought I'd never walk again. And now, she gestured to herself, still smiling. Now I'm standing here without help. I'm so proud of you, Ethan said, pulling her into a hug. So damn proud. I couldn't have done it without you, either of you. Rebecca looked down at Sophie. You reminded me why it was worth fighting to get better, why it was worth showing up every day, even when it hurt. We just helped a little, Sophie said. You did all the hard work. We helped each other. That's what family does. The word hung in the air between them. Family. It was the first time any of them had used that word to describe what they were becoming. But it felt right. It felt true. They walked together to Sophie's school, all 3 of them, no wheelchair to push or cane to steady. Just 3 people moving through the world side by side, connected by loss and love and the choice to keep showing up for each other. At the school gates, Sophie hugged them both and then paused, looking at Rebecca with a serious expression. Becca, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think your brother would be happy about you and Dad? Rebecca's eyes immediately filled with tears, but she smiled through them. Yeah, sweetheart. I think he'd be really happy. I think he'd say he's glad we found each other. Good, because I think my mom would be happy too. Sophie hugged her again quickly, then ran off to join her friends, leaving 2 adults standing on the sidewalk trying not to cry. She's right, you know, Ethan said quietly. Claire would be happy. About us. About you being part of Sophie's life. Michael would tell me I was an idiot for waiting so long to admit how I felt. Rebecca wiped her eyes. He always said I overthought everything. Sounds like he knew you pretty well. He did. She took Ethan's hand. I wish they could have met each other. Claire and Michael. I think they would have been friends. They're connected anyway, through us, through Sophie, through everything that's happened. Ethan squeezed her hand. They're part of this story, even if they're not here to see how it ends. Maybe they are seeing it. Maybe they're watching and cheering us on. Maybe they are. They stood there for another moment, watching students stream into the school, before turning to walk back home together. The morning was beautiful, the air warm and full of promise, and for the first time in 3 years, Ethan felt like the future was something to look forward to rather than something to survive. That afternoon, Rebecca came over early. She and Ethan sat at the kitchen table with laptops open, working on a project for a client who wanted a complete brand redesign. They'd fallen into a comfortable working rhythm, bouncing ideas off each other, challenging and supporting in equal measure. "What if we went with a warmer color palette?" Rebecca suggested, pulling up a sample. "Something that feels more approachable?" "I like it. Try it with the secondary logo and see how it looks." They worked in companionable silence for a while, until Rebecca suddenly closed her laptop and looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "I want to move in," she said, "with you and Sophie, when my lease is up in July." Ethan's heart stopped. "Are you sure? That's a big step." "I know. But I'm here all the time anyway, and I don't want to go home to an empty apartment anymore. I want to come home to you, to both of you." She paused. "Unless it's too soon. I don't want to push if you're not ready." "It's not too soon." Ethan reached across the table for her hand. "I want you here. Sophie wants you here. But are you ready for what that means? For all the mundane daily stuff, for bad moods and dishes in the sink and me being grumpy before coffee? Ethan, I've already seen all of that. I know what I'm signing up for." Rebecca smiled. "And I want it anyway. All of it. The good and the bad and the completely ordinary." "Then yes. Move in. Please move in." They sealed it with a kiss across the laptop computers, laughing when Rebecca nearly knocked her coffee over in the process. When Sophie came home from school that afternoon, they told her together. Her reaction was to pump her fist in the air and shout, "Finally!" so loud that the neighbor's dog started barking. "I've been waiting for you guys to figure this out forever," she said. "Can Becca have the guest room? We should paint it. Maybe blue or purple." "Becca, what's your favorite color?" "Sophie, slow down," Ethan laughed. "Let's take this one step at a time." But Sophie was already making plans, talking about furniture arrangements and where Rebecca's things would go, her enthusiasm infectious and impossible to contain. That night, after Sophie was finally in bed, still chattering about paint colors, Ethan and Rebecca sat together on the porch, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. "Are you scared?" Rebecca asked. "Terrified," Ethan admitted, but in a good way, in a way that feels like moving forward instead of staying stuck. "Me too." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for taking a chance on this. On us. Thank you for showing up at that corner every morning, for letting me help you, for becoming someone I can't imagine my life without. We helped each other. That's what we do." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to crickets and distant traffic, two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of grief and built something beautiful from the broken pieces. The future was still uncertain. There would be hard days and difficult conversations and moments when the weight of what they'd lost threatened to crush what they were building. But they'd face it together, showing up for each other the same way they had every morning for the past 7 months. Some kindnesses didn't end in thanks or applause. They ended in changed lives, in new beginnings, in love that grew from the smallest acts of daily devotion. And sometimes, without knowing it, you helped someone survive simply by being there, again and again, until one day you both realized you weren't just surviving anymore. You were living. July arrived with heat that shimmered off the pavement and turned the city into a patchwork of seeking shade and cold drinks. Moving day came on a Saturday, the kind where the sun was relentless by 9 in the morning. Ethan had arranged for a small truck, though Rebecca insisted she didn't have much to move. She'd been right. After 3 years of living small, of existing rather than thriving, her possessions fit into boxes that told a story of someone who'd stopped accumulating things when life stopped making sense. Sophie appointed herself the supervisor, directing traffic with the authority of a general commanding troops. "That box goes in Becca's room." "No, Dad, Not the living room, her room, the one we painted purple. I thought we agreed on blue, Ethan said, hauling another box up the stairs. We compromised. It's periwinkle. Rebecca laughed from the doorway, watching them with an expression that made Ethan's chest go warm. She's got you well trained. You have no idea. Wait until she starts planning where your books go. She has opinions about alphabetization that border on fascist. I can hear you, Sophie called from upstairs. And it's not fascist, it's organized. By noon, most of Rebecca's things were inside, and they collapsed in the living room with sandwiches and lemonade. Sophie sat between them on the floor, her hair sticking to her forehead with sweat, looking satisfied with the morning's work. This is good, she announced. Our family needed 3 people. 2 was too quiet. Ethan and Rebecca exchanged glances over her head. There was that word again, family. Each time Sophie used it, it became more real, more solid, less like something fragile that might shatter if they examined it too closely. You know what we should do? Sophie continued, not waiting for a response. We should take a picture, like a first day of our new family picture. Soph, I don't know if Ethan started, but Rebecca cut him off. I think that's a great idea. She pulled out her phone and held it at arm's length, angling it to capture all 3 of them. Everyone smile. They crowded together, faces flushed from heat and effort, Sophie in the middle grinning like this was the best day of her life. Rebecca snapped the photo and then pulled it up to look at it. Her expression went soft. We look happy, she said quietly. Ethan leaned over to see the screen. She was right. In the photo, they looked like what they were becoming, a family knitted together from loss and hope, and the daily choice to show up for each other. Send that to me, he said. Me too, Sophie added. I want to print it and put it on my wall. That night, after Sophie was asleep and the house had finally cooled down, Ethan and Rebecca sat on the back porch in the dark. Rebecca's things were unpacked, her clothes hanging in the closet next to his, her toothbrush in the cup beside the sink, the mundane markers of a shared life. I can't believe I actually live here now, Rebecca said. Like, I know I do. I just moved all my stuff in. But it doesn't feel real yet. Give it time. Wait until you're annoyed at me for leaving dishes in the sink or using all the hot water. Then it'll feel real. I look forward to being annoyed at you for mundane domestic reasons. She smiled, then went quiet for a moment. Can I tell you something? Always. When I woke up in the hospital after my accident, after they told me about my spine and what it might mean, my first thought was that I wanted to die. Not in a suicidal way, just I couldn't see any reason to keep going. Michael was already gone. My parents had checked out emotionally. I was facing months of recovery for an outcome that might still leave me in a wheelchair forever. She paused, her voice thick. And now here I am, walking again, living with someone I love, part of a family I never thought I'd have. Sometimes I can't reconcile those 2 versions of myself, the one who wanted to give up and the one sitting here right now. Ethan reached for her hand in the darkness. You're both those people, the one who felt hopeless and the one who fought anyway. That's not a contradiction. That's just being human. When did you stop wanting to give up? After Claire died. The question sat heavy between them. Ethan thought about those first months after the funeral, the mornings he'd wanted to stay in bed forever, the nights he'd stood in Sophie's doorway watching her sleep and wondering how he could possibly be enough for her. Honestly, I'm not sure I ever completely stopped. There are still days when it all feels too hard, when I wake up and the first thought is that I can't do this. He squeezed her hand. But then Sophie needs breakfast, or a permission slip signed, or help with homework, and I don't have the luxury of giving up. So I just keep going, one day at a time, sometimes 1 hour at a time. And now? Now I have more reasons to keep going. You, us, the future we're building. He turned to look at her profile in the darkness. You gave me something I didn't think I'd ever have again. Hope. Rebecca's voice was barely a whisper. You gave me the same thing. They sat in silence, hands clasped, listening to the night sounds of the neighborhood. A dog barking in the distance, the hum of air conditioners, the occasional car passing on the street out front. Ordinary sounds of ordinary life, and Ethan had never been more grateful for ordinary. The next few weeks settled into a new rhythm. Morning still started at 6:15, but now Rebecca was there, making coffee while Ethan burned pancakes, both of them working together to get Sophie ready for summer camp. The walk to drop Sophie off had shifted too. Instead of meeting Rebecca at the corner, she walked with them from the start, the three of them together from the very beginning of the day. One morning in late July, Sophie asked the question that had been hovering in the background for weeks. "Becca, are you going to marry my dad?" Ethan choked on his coffee. Rebecca's eyes went wide. They were at the breakfast table, the question landing like a bomb in the middle of their peaceful morning routine. "Sophie, that's not… You can't just…" Ethan stammered, his face burning. "Why not? It's a reasonable question." Sophie looked between them with complete innocence. "You love each other. You live together. Marriage seems like the logical next step." "Sweetie, adults don't always follow a logical progression," Rebecca said carefully, though Ethan could see the flush creeping up her neck. "Sometimes they just take things as they come." "But do you want to, eventually?" Sophie pressed. "Because I think it would be good. Then Becca would officially be my family, not just living with us family." Ethan found his voice. "Soph, Becca is already your family. Marriage doesn't change that." "But it makes it official, like on paper." Sophie took another bite of cereal, clearly not understanding why both adults were looking at her like she'd just detonated an explosive device. "I'm just saying, I'd be okay with it if you wanted to." She finished her cereal, put her bowl in the sink, and headed upstairs to brush her teeth, leaving Ethan and Rebecca staring at each other across the table. "I'm sorry," Ethan said. "She's been watching too many romantic comedies with my mother." "It's okay." Rebecca's voice was strange, and when Ethan really looked at her, he saw something complicated in her expression. "It's actually kind of sweet. That she's thought about it. That she'd want that." "Rebecca, I know we haven't talked about it. I know it's too soon, probably. We've only been officially together for 3 months, but Ethan…" She trailed off, then started again. "I think about it sometimes, about what that would look like, a future that permanent." Ethan's heart was hammering. "You do? Don't you?" He wanted to lie, to deflect, to maintain the careful distance that felt safer, but they'd promised each other honesty, and he couldn't break that promise now. "Yeah, I do. Not right now, not immediately, but yeah, I think about it." "Okay." Rebecca smiled, shaky but real. "Okay, so we're both thinking about it. We can leave it at that for now." "For now," Ethan agreed. Sophie came thundering back down the stairs, and the moment passed, but it left something in the air between them. An acknowledgement of a future that extended beyond the present, beyond the careful day-by-day existence they'd been maintaining. That weekend, Rebecca suggested they visit the cemetery. It was the first time she'd brought it up, and Ethan knew it had taken courage. They'd been avoiding the physical places where their grief lived, both of them understanding instinctively that there were some wounds you had to approach slowly. "Are you sure?" Ethan asked. "No, but I think we should, together." Rebecca's hands were twisting in her lap, a nervous gesture she usually didn't show. "I haven't been to see Michael since right after my accident. I couldn't handle it then, but now I think I need to. And I don't want to go alone." "Okay. When? Tomorrow? Sophie has that birthday party she's going to. We could go while she's there." The next day, Ethan drove them to the cemetery where both Claire and Michael were buried. It was a quiet place, well-maintained, with old trees providing shade over the neat rows of headstones. They'd been buried in different sections, and Ethan parked between the two areas. "Do you want to go together or separate?" he asked. Rebecca thought about it. "Separate first, then together. Is that okay?" "Of course." She went to find Michael's grave, and Ethan walked the familiar path to Claire's. He'd been here dozens of times in the first year, then less frequently as time went on and the acute grief settled into something more manageable. Now he stood in front of the simple headstone with Claire's name and dates, and he felt the old pain, but also something new. Permission. "Hey," he said quietly, feeling only slightly ridiculous talking to a piece of granite. "I know it's been a while. Things have been different lately. Good different, mostly. I met someone. Her name is Rebecca. I think you'd like her. She's stubborn and brave, and she makes Sophie laugh. She makes me laugh too, which I know you'd be happy about." He paused, picking at a blade of grass that had grown too close to the stone. Her brother was there that night, Michael Chen, the paramedic. He was the one who stayed with you at the end, and he's buried here too, actually, just over there. Ethan gestured vaguely. "I'm in love with her, Claire, with Rebecca. And I know you'd tell me that's good, that you'd want that for me, but I needed to come here and say it anyway, to tell you that I'm moving forward, but I'm not leaving you behind. You're still part of this story. You always will be." A breeze moved through the trees, and Ethan chose to believe it was Claire's way of saying she understood. He found Rebecca standing in front of Michael's grave, tears streaming down her face. When she saw Ethan approaching, she held out her hand and he took it, standing beside her. "I told him about us," she said. "About you and Sophie. About how I'm walking again, how I'm living again. I think he'd be happy. He always wanted me to be happy. I told Claire the same thing, that you make me happy, that you make Sophie happy." They stood together in silence for a while, then walked hand in hand back to Claire's grave. Ethan felt strange bringing Rebecca here, to this physical reminder of his first marriage, but she stood with him without hesitation. "Thank you," Rebecca said quietly, "for sharing your wife with me. I know that sounds strange, but I mean it. You talk about her. You let Sophie talk about her. You keep her memory alive. That matters. She's part of who I am. I couldn't hide that, even if I wanted to." Ethan looked at the headstone. "And I think she'd like you. I think she'd be glad Sophie has you in her life." "I hope so." They visited Michael's grave together next, and Ethan stood while Rebecca told her brother about their life, about the morning walks that had turned into so much more, about the family they were building from broken pieces. It felt right, standing there together, honoring the people they'd lost while acknowledging the life they were building. On the drive home, Rebecca was quiet. Ethan let her be, understanding that some processing needed silence. But as they pulled into the driveway, she finally spoke. "I want to tell you about the day of my accident. I've never told anyone the whole story." Ethan turned off the car, but didn't move to get out. "Okay." It was February, 6 months after Michael died. I was driving to my parents' house because they'd finally agreed to come back to town to deal with his things. His apartment had been sitting there, untouched, because none of us could handle going through it. She was staring straight ahead, not looking at Ethan. I was on the highway when it started sleeting. I should have pulled over, but I was so angry at my parents for making me do this alone, so hurt that they'd abandoned me to deal with everything, that I just kept driving. "Rebecca..." "Wait, let me finish." She took a shaky breath. The semi in front of me hit his brakes. I hit mine too, but the road was ice. I slid right into him. The car flipped, and while I was lying there, waiting for the ambulance, all I could think was that this was fitting, that I deserved this for being angry at my parents, for not being there when Michael needed me, for surviving when he didn't. That's not true. You didn't deserve... I know that now. But then, I was drowning in guilt and grief, and I thought maybe this was the universe balancing the scales. She finally turned to look at him, and then I met you, and you showed up every morning, even when I was rude, even when I made it clear I didn't want help. You reminded me that people are basically good, that kindness still exists, that I was worth showing up for. You saved me, Ethan, not from the accident, from giving up afterward. Ethan's throat was too tight to speak. He reached across the console and pulled her into an awkward hug, the gear shift digging into his ribs, but he didn't care. "You saved me too," he whispered into her hair. "You reminded me I was still alive, that there was more to life than just surviving for Sophie's sake." They held each other in the car in their driveway, two people who'd found each other in the wreckage and decided to build something beautiful from what remained. August brought Sophie's 10th birthday, and she requested a small party in the backyard with a few friends from camp. Ethan and Rebecca spent the morning decorating while Sophie slept in, hanging streamers and blowing up balloons, working in comfortable coordination that came from living together and learning each other's rhythms. "I can't believe she's 10, Ethan said, tying off another balloon. "It feels like yesterday she was 6, and I was explaining why Mommy wasn't coming home. She's grown up a lot, especially in the last year. Because of you. You've been good for her, for both of us." Rebecca smiled, but there was something sad in it. "I wish Michael could meet her. He would have loved her. He always wanted to be an uncle. He is an uncle. Maybe not by blood, but Ethan gestured between them. This thing we're building, it makes him part of our family too. His memory, his influence on you, the way he shaped who you became, that's all part of Sophie's life now. I never thought about it that way. Well, start thinking about it, because it's true. The party was chaotic in the best way. Sophie and her friends ran around the yard playing games while Ethan manned the grill and Rebecca handled drink refills and snack distribution. They worked together seamlessly, and more than one parent commented on how nice it was to see them so happy together. When it was time for cake, Sophie stood at the head of the table, Ethan on one side and Rebecca on the other, looking at the 10 candles flickering in the afternoon sun. "Make a wish, sweetheart," Ethan said. Sophie closed her eyes, was quiet for a moment, then blew out all the candles in one breath. When she opened her eyes, she looked directly at Rebecca. "I wished for us to stay together forever," she said. "All three of us. Is that okay?" Rebecca's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "That's more than okay. That's perfect." That night, after the guests had left and the backyard was cleaned up, and Sophie was in bed exhausted from the day's excitement, Ethan and Rebecca sat on the porch with the leftover birthday cake. "I've been thinking about what Sophie said," Rebecca began. "About staying together forever." "Yeah?" "I want that. I want to marry you, Ethan. Not right now, not this second, but someday. I want to make this official. I want to be Sophie's family in every way possible." She set down her cake and turned to face him fully. "I know it's only been a few months of living together, and maybe it's too fast, but I've never been more sure of anything." Ethan felt like his heart might explode out of his chest. "I want that too. I've wanted it for weeks, but I was too scared to say it." "So we're agreed? Someday, when it feels right, we'll make this permanent?" "Yeah, we're agreed." They kissed, sweet and soft and full of promise, and Ethan felt like every choice he'd made since that first morning helping a stranger with her wheelchair had been leading to this moment. September came, and with it, Sophie's return to school. The first day of 4th grade brought the familiar rush of new supplies and outfit debates and last-minute permission slip hunts. But this year was different. This year, when Ethan walked Sophie to school, Rebecca walked with them. Not meeting them at a corner, not joining partway through, but walking from the house as a unit. At the school gates, Sophie hugged them both, no longer self-conscious about displays of affection in front of her peers. "Have a great first day," Ethan said. "Love you both," Sophie replied, and then she was gone, absorbed into the stream of students. Ethan and Rebecca walked home hand in hand, the September morning cool enough to need light jackets. When they passed the corner where they'd first met, where Ethan had stopped to help a stranger who would change his life, they both paused. "This is where it started," Rebecca said. "Seems like a lifetime ago." "It was a lifetime ago. We were different people then." She looked at the corner, at the pharmacy entrance, at the exact spot where her wheelchair had gotten stuck on the curb cut. "I was so lost, so angry at the world, and you just showed up. You showed up too, every morning, no matter what." They stood there for a moment longer, honoring the place where their story had begun, then continued home. That afternoon, Ethan answered a phone call from a number he didn't recognize. A woman's voice, hesitant and nervous, asked if he was Ethan Moore. "Yes, this is Ethan. Can I help you?" "My name is Patricia Chen. I'm Rebecca's mother." Ethan's stomach dropped. Rebecca had mentioned that her parents hadn't reached out in months, that the distance between them had grown too vast to bridge. He had no idea what this call meant. "Mrs. Chen? Hello, is everything okay?" "Yes, I wanted to talk to you about Rebecca. Is she there?" "She's at the store. She'll be back in about 20 minutes. "Good, that's good. I needed to talk to you first anyway." Patricia Chen took a shaky breath. "Rebecca's father and we've been following her social media. We know we don't have the right to, after how we abandoned her, but we wanted to see how she was doing, and we've seen the photos of her walking again, of her with you and your daughter. She looks happy, Mr. Moore. She looks truly happy for the first time since Michael died." Ethan didn't know what to say to that. "She is happy. We all are." "I'm glad. I'm so glad." Patricia's voice cracked. I need to tell you something. About the night Michael died. Rebecca doesn't know this, but Michael called me from the accident scene, before the second car hit. He told me about a patient he couldn't save, about a father and daughter who'd lost everything. He said it was the worst call of his career, and I've been thinking about that conversation for 3 years, wondering about that family. Ethan sat down heavily, already knowing where this was going. That was my wife, Claire Moore, and my daughter Sophie. Patricia Chen gasped. You're the father from Michael's call? Yes. And you and Rebecca, you found each other? Without knowing. We found each other because I stopped to help her with her wheelchair one morning. We didn't know about the connection until months later. There was silence on the other end of the line, then the sound of quiet crying. Michael would say that was meant to be, that nothing happens by accident. Maybe he'd be right. Mr. Moore, Ethan, I owe you an apology, several apologies, for abandoning Rebecca when she needed us most, for not being there when Michael's death nearly destroyed her, for running away instead of facing our grief together. Patricia's voice was thick with tears now. But I also need to thank you for being there when we weren't, for helping her walk again, not just physically but emotionally, for giving her a reason to keep going. Rebecca did that herself. I just showed up. Sometimes showing up is everything. Patricia paused. Would it be possible? I know I have no right to ask, but would it be possible for us to visit? To try to rebuild what we destroyed? Ethan thought about Rebecca, about the pain she carried from her parents' abandonment, about how hard she'd worked to build a life without their support. But he also thought about family, about second chances, about the way love could grow even from broken foundations. I think you should call Rebecca and ask her that yourself. I can't make that decision for her. You're right. Of course you're right. Patricia took a shaky breath. Thank you for taking care of my daughter, for loving her when we couldn't figure out how to. After they hung up, Ethan sat in the quiet house, processing the conversation. When Rebecca came home 20 minutes later, he told her about the call. He watched her face cycle through emotions, shock, anger, hurt, and finally something that looked like hope. My mother wants to visit, she said slowly, as if testing the words. She said she's been following your social media, seeing how happy you are. And she wants to be part of that happiness now, after 3 years of radio silence? I don't know what she wants, but I think she wants to try to repair what's broken. Ethan took her hand. The question is, what do you want? Rebecca was quiet for a long time. I want to be angry at them. I want to tell them no, that they don't get to walk back into my life after abandoning me. But I also... She trailed off. But you also want your parents back, Ethan finished gently. Yeah, is that stupid? No, it's human. What should I do? I can't tell you that. But I can tell you that whatever you decide, I'll support it. If you want to see them, we'll make that happen. If you don't, we'll handle that too. This is your choice, Rebecca. Nobody else's. She nodded slowly, then pulled out her phone. I need to call her back. Ethan left her alone for the conversation, busying himself with starting dinner. He could hear the murmur of Rebecca's voice from the living room, rising and falling with emotion. When she finally came to the kitchen, her face was blotchy from crying, but she looked lighter somehow. They're coming next weekend, she said. Just for the day. To meet you and Sophie officially. To try to start over. How do you feel about that? Terrified. Hopeful. Angry. Grateful. She laughed shakily. All of it at once. That sounds about right. The week leading up to the visit was tense. Rebecca cleaned the house obsessively, rearranged furniture, changed outfits 5 times the morning of. Sophie, sensing the importance of the day, was on her best behavior, helping without being asked and keeping her usual chatter to a minimum. When the doorbell rang at noon, Rebecca froze. Ethan squeezed her hand and answered the door himself. Patricia and David Chen stood on the porch looking nervous and older than Ethan had expected. Patricia was holding a bakery box, and David had flowers. They both had Rebecca's eyes. Mr. Moore, Patricia said, thank you for having us. Please, call me Ethan. Come in. Rebecca appeared in the hallway, and for a moment nobody moved. Then Patricia burst into tears and crossed the space between them, pulling her daughter into a fierce hug. "I'm sorry," Patricia sobbed. "I'm so sorry we left you. I'm sorry we weren't there when you needed us. I'm sorry for everything." Rebecca stood stiff in her mother's arms for a moment, then slowly, tentatively, hugged her back. "I'm sorry too for shutting you out, for being angry." "You had every right to be angry." David joined the hug, and the three of them stood in the hallway crying while Ethan and Sophie watched from a respectful distance. When they finally pulled apart, Patricia turned to Ethan and Sophie. "You must be Sophie," she said, her voice still thick with tears. "Rebecca has told us so much about you." "It's nice to meet you," Sophie said politely, then looked at her father for guidance. "Why don't we all sit down?" Ethan suggested. "I made lunch. Nothing fancy, but there's plenty." The afternoon was awkward at first, everyone carefully navigating around 3 years of pain and abandonment. But slowly, gradually, the conversation found its rhythm. Tricia and David asked about Rebecca's recovery, about her work, about the life she'd built. They listened to Sophie talk about school and her friends and her upcoming science project. They looked at family photos on the mantle, seeing Michael's face again for the first time in years. And they apologized. Over and over, they apologized for not being there, for running away, for choosing their own grief over their daughter's needs. "We thought we couldn't survive if we stayed," David explained quietly. "Everything here reminded us of Michael, the hospital where he worked, the streets he drove, the house where he grew up. We thought getting away would make it easier." "Did it?" Rebecca asked. "No, it made it worse. We were alone with our grief instead of sharing it with you. We realize now that was the wrong choice." "So why come back now?" Patricia looked at her daughter with eyes full of regret and love. "Because we saw the photos of you walking again. We saw you with Ethan and Sophie. We saw you living instead of just surviving. And we realized that while we'd been hiding from our pain, you'd been facing it and building something beautiful. We wanted to be part of that, if you'll let us." Rebecca's hands were shaking in her lap. Ethan reached over and took one, grounding her. "I don't know if I can forgive you," Rebecca said honestly. "Not right away. Maybe not ever completely. But I want to try. I want my parents back. I want Sophie to know her grandparents." Patricia's face crumpled with relief. "That's more than we deserve. Thank you." The visit stretched into the evening. Patricia and David insisted on seeing Rebecca walk, and she obliged, pacing the length of the living room with only the slightest hesitation in her gait. They cried watching her, understanding in a way that only parents could what that journey must have cost her. When they finally left, with promises to call weekly and visit monthly, Rebecca collapsed on the couch, emotionally exhausted. "That was hard," she said. "Yeah," Ethan agreed, sitting beside her. "But you did it. You took the first step. It's not going to be easy. They hurt me so badly. I don't know if we can get back what we lost." "Maybe you can't. But maybe you can build something new, something different, but still good." Sophie crawled onto the couch between them, and the three of them sat together in the quiet house, processing the enormity of the day. The months that followed brought a new equilibrium. Patricia and David kept their word, calling every week and visiting once a month. The relationship with Rebecca was still fragile, still marked by the scars of abandonment, but it was growing, healing. Sophie loved having grandparents who spoiled her and asked about school and taught her to play cards. In November, on the anniversary of when Ethan had first helped Rebecca with her wheelchair, he took her back to that corner. It was early morning, the same time they used to meet, and the street looked exactly as it had a year ago. "A year," Rebecca said, looking at the spot where her chair used to get stuck. "Can you believe it's been a year?" "Best year of my life," Ethan said. Then he dropped to one knee. Rebecca's hands flew to her mouth. "Ethan, what are you—" "I know we said someday. I know we agreed to wait until it felt right. But Rebecca, every day with you feels right. Every morning I wake up next to you feels like a gift I don't deserve. And I don't want to wait anymore." He pulled out a ring he'd been carrying for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. "Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life showing up for you the way you've shown up for me?" "Yes," Rebecca said through tears. "Yes, of course, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger and stood up to kiss her, right there on the corner where everything had started. When they pulled apart, they were both crying and laughing, and Ethan felt like his heart might burst from happiness. Sophie is going to lose her mind, Rebecca said, looking at the ring on her finger. She helped pick it out. She's been keeping this secret for 3 weeks. That little, Rebecca laughed. She knew and didn't tell me? She said, and I quote, "Some secrets are worth keeping if they make people happy." They walked home hand in hand, engaged now, planning a future that a year ago neither of them could have imagined. When they told Sophie, she screamed so loudly the neighbor's dog started barking, then insisted on calling Patricia and David immediately to share the news. The wedding was small, held in May on a perfect spring day in the same park where they'd spent so many Sunday afternoons. Sophie was the maid of honor, wearing a dress she'd picked out herself and holding both wedding rings with the seriousness of someone entrusted with the crown jewels. Patricia and David sat in the front row, crying quietly, grateful to be included in their daughter's joy. But before the ceremony started, Ethan and Rebecca slipped away to visit the cemetery. They stood together in front of Claire's grave, and Ethan laid a single flower on the stone. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for Sophie, for the years we had, for giving me permission to love again." Then they walked to Michael's grave, and Rebecca did the same, placing a flower and speaking words only she and her brother would understand. When they returned to the park, hand in hand, they were ready. Ready to honor the past while building the future. Ready to choose love even though they both knew how much it hurt to lose it. Ready to show up for each other every single day, rain or shine, good or bad, for the rest of their lives. Sophie walked Rebecca down the aisle, and when Ethan saw them coming toward him, this woman he loved and the daughter who'd brought them together, he couldn't stop the tears. They were happy tears, grateful tears, tears that acknowledged both the pain of the past and the promise of the future. The vows they spoke were simple. They promised to show up, to be honest, to support each other's healing, to honor the people they'd lost while loving the people they'd found, to build a family from broken pieces and make it whole. When they kissed as husband and wife, Sophie cheered louder than anyone, and Ethan thought he heard Claire's laugh in the sound, Michael's approval in the breeze that moved through the trees. That night, after the reception had ended and Sophie was asleep at Patricia and David's house, Ethan and Rebecca sat on their porch looking at the stars. "Mrs. Moore," Ethan said, testing out her new name. "I kind of like the sound of that," Rebecca admitted, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Though I might keep Chen professionally. Rebecca Chen Moore. That works. Whatever makes you happy. You make me happy. You and Sophie and this life we've built from absolutely nothing." She held up her left hand, the wedding ring catching the porch light. "A year ago, I was alone and broken and convinced I'd never be whole again. And now here I am, married to my best friend, stepmother to the most incredible kid, actually happy for the first time in years. We did that together. We saved each other." "No," Rebecca corrected gently. "We showed up for each other. There's a difference." And there was. Showing up didn't fix everything. It didn't erase grief or heal wounds or undo tragedy. But it meant that when life became unbearable, you weren't carrying the weight alone. It meant choosing connection over isolation, hope over despair, love over fear. It meant that every morning, no matter the weather, no matter how hard the day ahead looked, you put one foot in front of the other and moved forward. Sometimes you needed help. Sometimes you needed to steady someone else. But you kept showing up. The morning light was soft as Ethan and Rebecca walked Sophie to school, the three of them moving through familiar streets that had become home in every sense of the word. When they passed the corner where it all began, they didn't stop. They didn't need to anymore. That corner had served its purpose, brought them together, started the story that was still unfolding. But the real story wasn't about that corner. It wasn't about the wheelchair or the helping hand or even the impossible coincidence that had connected them. The real story was about what came after, about the daily choice to show up, to be present, to love even when loving was terrifying. Some kindnesses didn't end in thanks or applause. They ended in changed lives, in new families built from broken hearts, in love that grew from the smallest acts of compassion repeated day after day after day. And sometimes, without knowing it, you helped someone survive simply by being there, by refusing to walk past their struggle, by choosing every morning to show up, again and again and again. Until one day you both realized you weren't just surviving anymore. You were living, you were loving, you were building something beautiful from the wreckage of what you'd lost. You were finally and fully home.